Thank you, delegates. Can you take your seats, please? I call Congress to order. Thank you, delegates. Delegates, while the fringe guides are advertised in the Congress Guide, I'd like to remind you that the launch of the Disabled People's Summit Fringe meeting takes place this evening in Room 8 of the Brighton Centre. And Congress, the General Council has asked me to share their appreciation that the bucket collection yesterday in support of victims of the Grenfell Tower fire raised an amazing £637.81. Congress, as reported yesterday, agreement has now been reached on Composite Motion 14, Health and Social Care Transformation, Integration and Cuts, comprising motions 57 and 58, to be moved by unison and seconded by the SCP. I intend to take the complete composite motion after the scheduled business this afternoon. Congress, it is now time to celebrate the work and achievements of those who bring the benefits of trade unionism to tens and thousands of workers every day, our workplace union representatives. Every single day of the year, they advise, guide, and represent members. Quite simply, they make life both inside and beyond the workplace better for working people. They are the grassroots heroes of our movement. First, we are going to watch a short video that celebrates their work before the General Secretary presents the winners with their awards.
I'm the lucky recipient this year of the Organiser of the Year award from TUC for 2017, and I'm pleased not just on my behalf but on behalf of GMB Union as well. I am a small private hire driver operator. I'm a lay member at the GMB. I represent professional drivers. In 2012, I questioned some of the motivation behind Uber and their operations. Concerns over 0 hours contracts, gangmasters telling people when they could and couldn't come from work and putting them in a position where they were subservient to others needed to change. We were able to bring a case against Uber to give the benefits of holiday pay, sick pay, and to protect those who are being taken advantage of by those who feel they can skirt the law. Off the back of that, obviously, we've run not only a successful tribunal, but a media campaign and social media campaign to highlight this, and it's created a sea change for workers throughout the United Kingdom.
So won the TUC Health and Safety Award. I'm completely over the moon. I work at Tesco's. I'm a customer delivery driver. I'm also health and safety rep, and health and safety is my passion. Something I'm really proud that we put in place in Crawley Fulfilment Centre is we set up a health and safety committee to go round all the sections and try to get any outstanding health and safety issues addressed. We've made sure that the trays are at the weight that Tesco's stipulate they should be, so that, you know, nobody's getting hurt through back, shoulder, arm injuries. We're also going out and looking at customers' addresses where drivers deem it to be unsafe, so we're reaching compromises, and we've seen our accidents drop tremendously here. A unionised workplace is a better workplace, it's a safer workplace, unity is strength. It's as simple as that, really.
I'm really delighted to have won the TUC Learning Rep Congress Award. I work in a regeneration department at Hull City Council. I first became active as a union learning rep in Unite about 3 years ago. I've undertaken a lot of learning events and promotion to enable staff to access the opportunities that we offer. I've set up a learning committee which meets regularly, and so far we've managed to achieve 150 people into adult apprenticeships, and we've had expressions of interest from another 66 people for short courses at level 2. With budgets cut the way they are, we have to find all sorts of opportunities to bring learning to the council, and this is a brilliant opportunity to do that.
It's really gratifying to have won the TUC Youth Award. It's great to know that my colleagues in PCS were appreciative of my work to put me forward for the nomination in the first place. For my day job, I'm an agri-environmental stewardship scheme advisor, so I advise farmers on how they can use areas of land to have environmental benefit. I'm currently a branch secretary, and I also sit as an officer of the Young Members National Committee. I think the thing I'm most proud of working with PCS was the campaign around making temporary staff permanent, which we've been successful. There are 200 new permanent roles in Natural England. But also outside of PCS, in the wider trade union movement, I've done a lot of work with the Youth Forum of the TUC and also TUC to sort of engender that spirit of solidarity of the trade union movement in young workers.
It's difficult to explain exactly my feelings about learning that I've won the Women's TUC Gold Badge. Surprise, pride.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so pleased to be back home, Matt. There's such a lot that I want to do.
I've been involved with the union really from the moment I trod the boards as a professional. I'm really very, very passionate about gender equality. As you get older as a woman, your careers start to peter out because older women are just not represented. They're just not the roles there for them like there are for the equivalent male roles, and we have to do something about that to truly represent what's going on in society. I just really have to say how really proud I am to be part of the whole of the TUC movement, proud of my union, but the way in which we can all come together and support each other and collectively have a voice which makes a difference.
Congress, I'm sure you will agree it is always inspiring to see our lay reps in action. The General Secretary will now present the winners with their awards. So, this year's Safety Rep Award goes to Anthony Lampy of Usdaw. The winner of this year's Organising Award is GMB member Stephen Garelick. The winner of this year's Learning Award is Daphne Robbins of Unite. The winner of this year's Young Members Award is PCS activist Stephen Warwick. And the final award is the Woman's Gold Badge, and this year's recipient is Jean Rogers from Equity. And Francis has also awarded the Women's Gold Badge to Jean. Congress, can we give all the winners a huge round of applause? Thank you. I call paragraph 6.7. Delegates, we return this afternoon to section 1 of the General Council report, The Economy, the section on industrial policy from page 18. I call paragraphs 1.2 to 1.3, 1.7, 1.8 and composite motion number 1, a strong economy that works for all. The General Council support the composite motion, moved by Unite, seconded by ASLEF, supported by Community, and PCS and CWU have indicated that they would like to speak, and I will accept those speakers.
Great, thanks, Mary. Congress, Steve Turner, moving Composite 1 on behalf of Unite. Congress, the economic challenges we face are political challenges in reality, and this debate is really about political ideas, choices, and of course, priorities. For the Tories, state intervention in the market is a never abandoned socialist concept from a past era, never, of course, to return. And as far as industrial strategy is concerned, they wouldn't recognise one if it came up and punched them in the face. While their obsession, of course, with ideological economic model based on failed austerity remains the order of the day. For Labour, well, what a difference an election makes. Both the two elections that confirmed Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of our party and, of course, the recent general election. We saw Jeremy, John McDonnell and the team present a radical, popular, anti-austerity manifesto that laid out a vision of hope and opportunity, supported by a new economic model. It was an interventionist programme to support UK business and pump-start investment, coupled with an industrial strategy to transform our economy. Colleagues, we can be proud of our role in that development, both inside our party, of course, but also in keeping alive the arguments for a real alternative to austerity inside our workplaces and our communities through fantastic organisations like the People's Assembly. Developing thoughts and a narrative on an alternative economy, one based on intervention, on investment and growth. Growth that creates decent work for all, that ensures the fair distribution of that work and the wealth created by the many but currently hoarded by the few. Growth that rebuilds our manufacturing base and invests in people, in skills, our public services, our infrastructure, housing, research and development. Growth that makes the most from the opportunities provided by technologies and shares the benefits of that technological advance. Growth that reduces working time, eases us into earlier retirement, builds the greener, sustainable economy that we all strive for, and of course deals with the looming loss of millions of today's jobs to automation and artificial intelligence. For too long, governments have failed to deal with our deep structural problems of short-termism and a serious and long-term failure to invest, both at a state and, of course, at a corporate level, and coupled with a relentless drive to deregulate, to liberalise, and, of course, to privatise UK PLC. It's led to a stagnating economy and wages, an obscene growth in inequality and growing levels of personal debt. It's a model that's allowed powerful economic forces to sweep aside all else, no matter the human cost. And of course, austerity has served only to accelerate those trends. Austerity is a weapon, and it's a weapon that's being used to shrink the state, to dismantle our social fabric and the gains of our collective movement. Congress in Britain today, 1 in 8 workers are skipping meals to make ends meet. Almost half are worried about meeting basic household costs. In the real world, wages on average continue to be worth less than £2,000 than they did before the 2008 financial crash. Such is the spread of low pay that the majority of people living in poverty are actually in work. And within the next 5 years, of course, unsecured debt per household is set to hit record levels at over £15,000. And Congress, when we hear about the obscenities of nurses and other workers having to use food banks to get by, we know that something desperately needs to change. And of course we can win that industrially. But the general election showed that there has never been more support for a positive political alternative too, that puts people first. So it's our job to maintain and harness the energy from Labour's election campaign. It's our job to build a strong, powerful trade union movement, to replace fear and despair with hope and opportunity, to defeat austerity industrially and, of course, politically, to win a Labour government that will transform the economy for the many, not the few. Congress, it's time for a better Britain for working people and a new economy that plans, intervenes and succeeds. I move.
Thank you, Steve. Aslef.
President, Congress, Gary McKenny, Aslef, proud to be second in Composite 1. Political parties across the spectrum are talking about the importance of infrastructure investment, but we have yet to see anywhere near enough investment under the Tory-led coalition, the last Tory government, nor do we hold our breath with this Tory minority government. We are told the need to have a flexible workforce, nearly always at the cost of the worker, in order to make the economy competitive in our globalised world. Yet the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index ranks Britain 24th in the world of perceived quality of infrastructure. On transport infrastructure is ranked 13th, and on our railways 18th. Britain is the 5th biggest economy in the world. Therefore, creating infrastructure to match our status could dramatically bolster the economy. Borrowing to invest makes economic sense and is supported from groups as diverse as trade unions, the CBI and the OECD. The OECD points out that governments in many countries are currently able to borrow for long periods at very low interest rates, and therefore has urged them to increase spending on public investment projects. This will in turn more than pay for themselves. The report explains that 0.5% of GDP investment in infrastructure, which amounts to about 9 billion, could boost GDP by almost 0.6% and not 0.2% of the nation's debt share of GDP. This means a stimulus such as this effectively pays for itself. Yet, in July, the Tories reneged on their promise to electrify Great Western Main Line from Cardiff to Swansea, the Midland Main Line and tracks in the Lakes District. This was despite many assurances over the years that the work was going to happen. Electrified rail is faster, greener, more efficient and more reliable. Despite the government's protestations that bio-mode trains are a better alternative, we know that this is not a long-term answer for our transport needs. This represents short-termism and the same old Tory agenda of cuts. Not only are the electrified lines have improved the transport network, the work would have brought good quality jobs in regions that have not had the same investment as the South East and possibly the possibility of apprenticeships and training opportunities. The headline figures of unemployment have superficially looked okay despite the economic turbulence, but a small scratch below the surface shows that many of the jobs are insecure, on 0 hours, low pay and offer little opportunity to develop in the workforce. Infrastructure investment could be an opportunity to stimulate the economy through creating jobs as many sectors such as engineering, transport and the growing green economy. The government has a legally binding target to reduce carbon emissions by 57% by 2030 on 1990s levels. This will not happen without substantial investment. We need to take these challenges as opportunities to have a just transition to the green economy and create employment, training opportunities in the new industries, especially the regions and the communities that have been neglected for far too long. Congress, I urge you to support. I second. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. We're on 3 now. It's okay. It's okay. We know what we're doing now. Okay, thank you. Can we have it as community, please? It's all right. We've got it working now.
President, delegates, Jan Bounds, community, supporting the compositive. God, I got that wrong. My region of the Union is based in Kidderminster, a town built on the back of the carpet industry, an industry that once employed thousands of workers and supported countless families and communities. In fact, it breaks my heart to see what's happened to the industry and the town over recent years. Today, the carpet industry is a shadow of its former self, after cut upon cut, resulting from years of irresponsible management, neglect and offshoring. It's tragic, as the events of recent years have proven, that the UK needs a vibrant manufacturing sector. We cannot stake our country's economic future on the unpredictable fortunes of big finance and services. So we must protect our manufacturing industries that remain. We must nurture new opportunities and give UK manufacturing the best possible chance to succeed in the modern world. There is no doubt that successive governments have neglected their responsibilities. We need more investment in the infrastructure to drive economical growth. The government's investment to procurement of policies must support UK businesses right through to the supply chain, just like they do across Europe. Publicly invested projects must be made to work for our home industries and support UK jobs. Like HS2, if the railways are not made from railroad in the UK, which in turn is produced from UK billets forged from UK steel, then it will be a national disgrace. Value for taxpayers does not mean procuring manufactured products at the cheapest price. It means exacting maximum value for UK businesses throughout the supply chain. To support employment and skills and to encourage companies to invest and grow. And it means government giving us a sign that our manufacturing industries are valued and have a future. And it's not just us here in this room that are prepared to fight for it. Please support.
Thank you. And now we have PCS.
All right. President Congress, Kevin McHugh, Deputy President of PCS, to support Composite 1. Now, PCS did have an amendment in on tax justice, but it was rejected by the TUC GPC on the grounds that it did not relate substantively to the motion. Well, in 2015-16, I work in HMRC, and me and my colleagues actually collected £537 billion, so I think that might have helped the economy just a little bit, considering that's the majority of the government's money. PCS is clear that you cannot have a debate without developing a strong economy without discussing the issue of tax justice. Tax is a fundamental part of any plan for a fair economy. Tax avoidance on society is a scourge that undermines public trust and deprives our public services of the funds that they desperately need. Tackling tax avoidance and evasion is crucial to funding a universal social security system. And creating a fair tax system that works in the interest of the many and not the very wealthy few is key PCS policy and at the heart of our campaign. And we support a Robin Hood tax, but we also support immediate halt to the cuts and closures of HMRC offices and potential redundancies of HMRC staff. Just do the maths. Less tax workers, you collect less tax. It's not rocket science. The government claims there's no alternative to the austerity agenda by failing to close a tax gap that loses 120 billion a year. And at the same time, benefits are slashed, public services closed, and everybody else, high earners, have been given a tax cut when public sector workers and our members in HMRC have seen their income fall against inflation and the rise in cost of living. In November 2015, HMRC announced its plans to cut its officers, get this, from 170 officers to just 17 officers in the country. That will actually have a significant threat to the operation of HMRC, its service to the public and to the working lives of staff. There is a booklet downstairs at the PCS stall. It's free. Have a look, see where a tax office is closing somewhere near you, because it will be. If you're in Wales, for instance, there's 2 offices. If you live in Leeds and you want to travel north to the next office, it's my office in Newcastle. That's if they get away with their plans. In addition, the government's finance bill, which is currently going through Parliament, props up a rigged system by preserving non-dom status of offshore trusts and loosens the rules on business investment relief, which increases the scope for non-doms to avoid tax when they bring funds into the United Kingdom. We need a strong economy. Let's make the rich individuals and large corporations pay the tax that is due. They're the real scroungers, not the people claiming benefits. Stop the cuts in HMRC. We'll help the economy, and by doing that, we'll prosecute the fiddlers. Support the motion.
Thank you. CWU.
President Congress. Well, thanks for that. Andy Kerr, CWU, speaking in support of composite motion number 1. The CWU is fully behind this motion, which calls for the crucial investment needed in infrastructure across the UK. But in particular, we would like to draw out one element in communications. That is investment in high-quality broadband, universal broadband, which is essential for Britain to thrive and to ensure full participation in society and the economy, and is crucially at the centre of the future world of work. Broadband networks are increasingly being used to deliver public services, and you've heard Kevin make a comment a minute ago about financial services, tax services, but also in healthcare. And improved connectivity is expected to bring a net increase in jobs, improve social cohesion and reduce carbon emissions. Affordable broadband communication services are now a prerequisite for a full participation in our knowledge-based society, enabling everyone to go online as part of a broad digitisation strategy. It could add another £63 billion to the economy. And although there has been investment in UK communications networks, infrastructures, and speeds of at least 30 megabits per second, are now available to 89% of the UK, there are still 1.3 million households, 5% of the UK, who are still unable to receive a decent broadband speed of at least 10 megabits per second. Without a government and regulatory action that provides positive financial incentives for operators to invest and to compete, including in hard-reach areas, these households will be left behind in the digital divide. The CWU has long time consistently argued for a universal service obligation. We welcome the government's commitment to a USO of at least 10 megabits per second to premises across the UK. We do, however, have some concerns over the design. The demand-led approach, where a broadband connection is provided on request, preferably through combined connection requests, in order to reduce costs, creates barriers to achieving a USO and is unlikely to be the most effective solution to achieve maximum digital inclusion in the short and medium term. BT, for example, has made clear that it is willing to contribute to the provision of a USO for 10 megabits per second in broadband if the regulatory and policy environment supports its investment case. This includes investing over £6 billion over the next 3 years to extend superfast broadband beyond 95% by 2020. The government note in their USO consultation that they are considering this option, But to date, no decision has been made. In addition, the CWU supports the need for full inclusion of the UK's population with digital skills, and more needs to be done to get people online if the maximum benefit for the economy, businesses and individuals is to be realised. The CWU believe that regulatory environment must have a part to play in providing a UK's digital infrastructure. We believe that Ofcom should avoid an approach which focuses narrowly on reducing prices in the short term. It must establish a regulatory environment in which long-term investment and resourcing considerations are properly accounted for, including a highly qualified, highly skilled, and one that we believe should be fully unionised. This is essential for strengthening the UK's digital infrastructure and ensuring world-class connectivity for the nation. And I congratulate the Unite for putting forward this motion, and I ask you to fully support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, delegates, I'm going to put composite motion number 1, a strong economy that works for all, to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Congress. Congress, I'd now like to invite onto the platform the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. Conference, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Jeremy to Congress. As many will know, before entering Parliament, Jeremy was a trade union organiser, helping to win workplace justice for low-paid public sector workers. In Parliament, Jeremy has an unprecedented track record of standing up for working people both here and around the world. And as leader of the Labour Party, he was responsible for that fantastic manifesto. He has helped inspire a new generation of voters to go to the ballot box, and he showed the Labour Party truly was on the side of the many, not the few. Jeremy has been a friend and ally of the trade union movement, and I'm sure, delegates, well, you've already given him the warmest of welcomes. I'm sure you'll give it to him again as he walks up to the podium. Jeremy, we're dying to hear from you.
Congress, thank you. Absolute delight to be here today, and thank you for that very warm welcome. And Mary, I got a message for you this morning from the Shadow Cabinet. One of your pupils was taught by you, did very well in her English O-levels, and puts it all down to you. Shami Chakrabarti sends her solidarity to you and to the TUC. So you never know where teachers' work might end up. Thank you for everything you do as a movement for our people and our country, to secure better pay and conditions for working people and give them a voice in the workplace and a say in our politics. Trade unions are far and away the biggest voluntary and democratic organisations in this country. They're the roots and the lifeblood of the Labour Party. You are abused by the powerful and your rights attacked, including by this government. But the trade union movement represents the best of Britain and is a vital engine of progress in our democracy. And of course, trade unionism has always had international solidarity at its heart. And it's wonderful to see Ube Ballesteros, who was unjustly imprisoned for his trade union activity in Colombia, freed by international solidarity action by many people in this hall, and he's here with us today, and I just had the honour of speaking to him for a few minutes before I came into the hall, and I'm looking forward to him giving a more detailed briefing on the situation facing trade unionists in Colombia. Thank you for all you do for trade unionists under threat and imprisonment anywhere all around our world. Solidarity is vital. Please keep it up. But despite all your tireless efforts as trade unionists, modern Britain is marked by growing insecurity at work, which undermines and holds back both low-paid workers and the better paid. In fact, insecurity now goes to the very top of our public life. Think of poor Theresa May and the insecurity she's facing at the present time. But Congress, this escalating insecurity is not only bad for individual workers and their families, as it weakens bargaining strength and holds down pay, just as it fuels stress and powerlessness, it's also bad for our economy and for our whole society. This epidemic of low pay, which is closely tied up with insecurity at work, ruins people's lives, leaving workers and their families locked in poverty. It damages the economy as people have less to spend. It costs us all because it means more paid in tax credits and housing benefit from the public purse, and it means less tax being paid to fund public services. So I want to pay tribute to those unions which are working so hard to organise insecure workers and have taken on the exploiters, as Unite has done at Sports Direct, as the Bakers Union has done so impressively last week at McDonald's. McDonald's boss is paid 1,300 times more than the lowest paid of his staff, symbolic of the deep inequality and injustice that scars our society. That's why it's crucial for our movement to organise the lowest paid and most vulnerable workers. The TUC needs to represent all workers, and the least secure have to be our priority because they need our solidarity the most. Their needs for representation are the greatest. Last week, I raised some of these cases at Prime Minister's Question Time, and Theresa May could not bring herself to utter one word of condemnation of McDonald's or Sport Direct. This from a Prime Minister who tried to rebrand the Conservatives as the Workers' Party. No, it's okay, I didn't buy into it either. It's essential we work together as a movement, trade unions and the Labour Party, as part of local communities to stamp out low pay and insecurity. And I know it's not easy. As Mary explained, I was once a trade union official in Newpie, and before that, working in the Tailors and Garment Workers Union, as then was, representing low-paid garment workers, mostly women, victims of some of the most appalling practices by unscrupulous employers that denied them what they were owed. Exploitation and discrimination at work cuts across all sectors and pay grades. And that's why Unison's victory against tribunal fees in the High Court was such an outstanding gain, won on behalf of all workers. Thank you, Unison, for that effort and winning that. It's meant so much to so many people. Rights mean almost nothing if you can't afford to get access to them. And Congress, we're united behind the CWU and the 100,000 Royal Mail workers about to be balloted, fighting against cuts to their pay and pensions. Their fight is all of our fights because it's the usual story of privatisation. First, the company get the assets on the cheap, then they hike prices and cut services to the public, and next they cut workers' pay and pensions. Privatisation is about transferring wealth and power from the many to an elite few. And when the workers who provide the public services we all rely on are having to use food banks, you know that something is deeply wrong in this country. 7 years of Tory pay cuts have not only caused real hardship, they've damaged our public services by hitting recruitment, retention, and crucially, morale. This government's position seems to change by the hour. At the weekend, we were led to believe the pay cap was a thing of the past. Yesterday, the Prime Minister's spokesman said it would continue as planned. Today, as inflation rises to nigh on 3%, they try to divide people on the cheap. The POA is right. A pay cut is a pay cut. We must be united in breaking the pay cap for all workers. So let me be absolutely clear today. The Labour Party totally rejects the Tories' attempt to divide and rule, to play one sector off against another. A Labour government will end the public sector pay cap and give all workers the pay rise they deserve and so desperately need. That is our policy. And Congress, in the case of the Birmingham bin workers, which I know you've discussed today, we collectively, as the Labour and trade union movement, have a duty as a Labour movement to find a resolution to this dispute as soon as possible. Please, let's get that done quickly. Congress, we often talk about workers' rights, but we're not just talking about rights at work. We're talking about people's lives, about the chance to live a decent life, about work-life balance, the security of your home, living standards, your family life, and your mental health too. A Manchester University study recently found that poor quality jobs are actually worse for mental health than unemployment. Most people spend most of their lives as workers, selling their time, labour and skills. Workers' rights are human rights. They give protections to every single person in employment and indirectly to many more, children and carers, as well as those who need care. They're fundamental to any society that claims to be advanced or democratic. And yet these rights, your rights as workers, hard-won over generations, are currently being sacrificed by this Conservative government on the altar of a failing and ever more ruthless form of capitalism. Increasingly, flexible employment is sold to us as a benefit. They call it the gig economy. And who doesn't like going to a gig? And of course, it is a benefit to unscrupulous employers, but it is the source of continuous worry and insecurity for millions of people, and is in part responsible for the worsening mental health of a country that has lost over 6,000 mental health nurses in recent years. And when employers want genuine flexible work, TUC researchers found that shamefully, those parents and carers, often women, requesting flexible working, all too often found themselves punished instead, with fewer hours, fewer opportunities to progress, and some even losing their jobs. So, the next Labour government will take action right across the board to help protect people in the workplace. And although we would like to see another general election as soon as possible that delivers more Labour gains, and this time a Labour government, in the meantime, we will challenge the government in Parliament and outside every step of the way to defend working people, stand by you, the trade unions battling for people's rights day in and day out. Rights are won by all of us together, but they have to be constantly defended and enforced. And that's why we're opposing the Tories' dangerous EU withdrawal bill. Not out of any attempt to frustrate the vote to leave, but because of the extraordinary, unaccountable powers it would hand to a Tory government to impose decisions scrap protections, rip up workers' rights without Parliament having any say whatsoever. This is a threat to every worker in this country. You simply cannot trust the Tories with your rights at work, and that's why Labour voted against the bill last night. There is no doubt that the British workplace is already one of the most equal in the world. We have a huge and damaging imbalance of power between employers and employees, which has led to the proliferation of low-wage jobs, race-to-the-bottom agency workers, zero-hours contracts, and employers avoiding paying sick pay, holiday pay, and even the minimum wage through bogus self-employment. That has been effectively targeted by unions such as the GMB, fighting for Uber drivers denied their basic rights at work. Such practices are rife throughout the gig economy, which presents itself as somehow or other modern and dynamic, but all too often uses technology as a cover to deny both employees and customers basic protections. Technological innovation is crucial for our economic success. But technological advance cannot represent real progress if it means we drag back to 19th century employment practices, or it's used to impose deregulation that leaves people without dignity or security. Technological advance is driving change in the economy and the workplace at unprecedented speeds. But what is not inevitable is who benefits from it. We need a government and an economic and industrial policies that are not stuck in some 1980s time warp of neoliberal dogma, but are driven by the need to channel and shape technological change to benefit the many, not the few. That will not happen if we leave it to the market or corporate boardrooms. The Bank of England estimates that 15 million jobs could be at risk of automation over the next decade. And, as is so often the way, those most at risk are those who are paid the least. The deregulated gig economy is ripe for automation. It's no basis for economic advance and rising living standards. No. That demands high investment in the cutting-edge jobs of the future. When you add the Conservatives' continuing determination to hack away at the role of the state, cutting investment, squeezing public services, and removing your rights, it's not hard to see the dangers of the present course we're headed on. We already know that the Tory way of running the economy has dramatically widened regional inequalities, sharply increased the wealth gap with tax breaks for the few and public services cuts for the many. And the Tory approach to Brexit is to use the process of leaving to go much further, much faster in that direction, delivering a deregulated free market tax haven off the shores of Europe, underpinned by a race-to-the-bottom trade deal with Donald Trump, a Shangri-La for bosses and bankers, but nothing of the kind for everybody else. Because that is the real divide over Brexit. A Tory Brexit to drive down standards, or a Labour version that puts jobs first. We respect the result of the referendum, but we want a jobs-first Brexit, which guarantees full access to the European market as part of a new trade agreement and relationship with the European Union, which maintains and develops workers' rights, consumer and environmental protections, and uses powers returned from Brussels to support a new industrial strategy with investment in good jobs in every region and nation of Britain, where work pays, where employees have security and decent conditions, and prosperity is shared by the true wealth creators, the workforce. When we leave the EU, the current free movement rules will end, Labour wants to see fair rules and management of migration, fair rules that put jobs, living standards and the economy first, not fake immigration targets as the Tories do, that will never be met. And we will continue to assert that the rights of European Union nationals must be guaranteed immediately. We must never allow ourselves to be duped and divided. It isn't migrants who drive down wages and conditions, but unscrupulous employers supported by a government that slashes rights and protections at work whenever it gets the chance. It's our movement that's been the bedrock of resisting racism and fascism in the workplace and on the streets, and we must continue to oppose the division that the far right would seek to impose. So, if we want to tackle low pay and insecure work, we need a Labour government strengthening workers' rights, enforced by strong trade unions, taking action to prevent employers undercutting pay and conditions, not closed borders, xenophobic intimidation and scapegoating. That's why our General Election Manifesto set out a 20-point plan for security and equality at work, including equal rights for all from day one in a job, banning zero-hours contracts, guaranteeing unions a right of access to workplaces, raising the minimum wage to a real living wage, ending the public sector pay cap, setting maximum pay ratios of 20-to-1 in the public sector and beyond, banning unpaid internships, doubling paternity pay, reinstating protection against harassment at work, and support the Dying to Work campaign to protect workers suffering from terminal illnesses. But ultimately, protections at work depend on those who work themselves. Winning a Labour government, even one with a programme to transform the country, which is now our goal, is simply not enough. That's why the most important thing any worker can do is join a trade union. And I want young people especially to hear this message. Many young people have recently got involved in politics for the first time. Tens of thousands of young people have joined the Labour Party in the recent months. And at the recent general election, we saw the long-running decline in young people voting totally reversed, with young people voting in higher numbers than they have for a generation. Politics is about power, and democratic politics is about putting power in the hands of the many, not just a few. The principle applies to the workplace too. If you want a job that pays a decent wage, that gives you a chance to get on in life, live independently and enjoy your work, then join a trade union. And for those watching, wherever you are, go online and do it today. You'll never regret it. Trade unions are often demonised in the right-wing press. I know it's a shock, I know it's a real shock to you, that billionaire, tax-dodging press barons don't like trade unions. I know it's a shock, and I'm sorry to bring you this kind of news. And you know what? They don't like us because our movement, through which the values of solidarity and community and social justice run like a thread from top to bottom. Our movement challenges unaccountable power of both government and bosses. But of course, the power of the billionaires who control great chunks of the media isn't what it was. They tried to dictate the election result in June with a blizzard of propaganda, and millions of voters simply ignored them. Trade unions don't just defend their members, they defend the institutions that benefit all employees. Our National Health Service, our schools, our social care, and they defend our rights. We don't know when the next general election will come. We're not in control of that. But you are in control of whether you join a trade union. Organise in your workplace or in your community and start changing people's lives for the better right now. We don't know how long it will take, but this weak and chaotic government will be prized out of Downing Street. And we know that the advances we made in the general election in June are just a powerful springboard to win the radical Labour government we want to see. So together we can change our country so it truly works for the many, not the few. Thank you, Congress. Thank you very much. Thank you for the honour of inviting me to Congress, and thank you for all you do as trade unionists, day in and day out, supporting people who need that help and support. Thank you.
Jeremy, that was really fantastic, and you can tell by the reaction and indeed the "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" that
It felt like we're alive.
Yeah, it feels like a vocal wave, doesn't it? Really, but I mean, it was just a fantastic speech, and thank you for recognising that trade unions are the biggest voluntary democratic organisations in this country, and that we represent the best of Britain. You'll be pleased to know we have been discussing at length this Congress the issue of organising low-paid, insecure workers, and in particularly young workers who suffer most from insecurity and austerity. Thanks for saying that workers' rights are human rights. Thanks for saying you simply can't trust the Tories for getting decent jobs at work. Thanks for raising again another thing that's been talked about at this conference, automisation and digitalisation. The trade union movement is ready to respond to that challenge. We want better training, we want a better curriculum, we want better preparation for the new world of work. And thanks for saying that everyone should be in a trade union. We agree. Thank you so much. Delegates, don't all just exit, because it's not fair on the next union. And we continue with Section 1 of the General Council report that debate the economy and Motion 7, Save Our Steel, which we need to do. The General Council support this motion. TSSA have withdrawn their amendment. It's moved by a community. It's seconded by Unite. And the TSSA have indicated that they wish to speak. Thank you.
President, Congress, Jacqueline Thomas, Community, proposing the motion Save Our Steel. Conference, as you know, our union represents thousands of steelworkers across the UK, and I'm one of them. I work at Tata Steel in Llanwern. Over the past 18 months, myself and my colleagues have faced uncertainty and heartbreak that comes with the lack of a decent industrial strategy. It was March last year that the heat of the steel crisis, Tata announced that they were pulling their business from the UK. The simple truth is that they couldn't turn a profit. Chinese dumping played a part. But the dumping also hurts our competitors. What really threatened to kill us was the lack of support from the successive governments who failed to understand the importance of heavy industry. For decades, government policy has prioritised the City of London over manufacturing. As a result, thousands of jobs have been lost in our communities. Steelworkers didn't stand by while our jobs were under threat. Instead, we launched a campaign, Save Our Steel. We marched in our communities in Scunthorpe, Motherwell, Newport, Corby and Port Talbot, joined by our colleagues from Trostre, Shotton, Hartlepool. We even rallied in Sheffield. We marched in Brussels, and we marched on Parliament. Marching as steelworkers, as steel unions and steel communities, lifting up our voices on the government to save our steel. And last year you invited the steelworkers to Congress, where you gave us our support, which we thank you for again. Congress, our campaign has made a difference. We got the government to listen, but now we need to see if they will act, which is why we're calling on your support again. Industries like steel now compete in the global market, and given fair chance, I back our workforce against any in the world. But we're forced to compete on a playing field that's not level, and against countries like China that don't play by the rules. Our countries like Germany find ways to support their industries through their energy policy, tax system and procurement. Which is why we must follow their lead if we want a steel sector in 20 years. That's why we need a proper industrial strategy to enable industries like steel to prosper in this changing world. Over the past year, we've been working in the industry to develop a sector strategy for steel. There's now a deal on the table which has been backed by all steel unions and employers. We now need the government to back it, to support high-quality jobs and communities that depend on them. We can have no more words for the government. So we still got to keep the pressure up, even if it means putting the feet on the back of their necks. And believe me, with my stilettos, they wouldn't want that. Because the UK needs a steel industry, and I'm proud to propose the motion, and please support it. Join us in our fight to save our steel. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Thank you. Unite.
President, Congress. Mark Thomas Turner, Unite, seconding motion 7. Conference, our steel industry has one of the greatest moments of crisis in its long history. That crisis, though, is far from over. But I am in no doubt that had it not been for our movement and the heroic Save Our Steel campaign, the furnace lights would have dimmed across our industry at both Port Talbot and Scunthorpe. Unite supports this motion because it is vital that we continue the campaign and make sure our members' futures are secured. Conference, we know that the Tory government had to be forced kicking and screaming to take any action. We also know that assistance in the 11th hour at the height of an emergency is simply not enough. Instead, we need a long-term vision that sees steel as a foundation industry, the beating heart of an ambitious industrial strategy for Britain. We know the arguments, from the construction of new power plants to the assembly of electric vehicles. There is a growing demand for high-quality steel. We should stoke that demand and use it to guarantee high-skilled, secure jobs in a world-class steel industry. Conference. Brexit presents our industry with new challenges, and we must meet it with new ideas. We are told that the government wants to embark on a new era of free trade, signing us up to trumped-up deals with China and America and anyone else who will have us. We, with one voice, must demand that the future of our steel industry must not be offered up for the exchange for a quick signature on any trade deal. This means protecting steel from Donald Trump's America First agenda. That means protecting steel from the damage of Chinese dumping. This is why my union, alongside comrades from the GMB and community, have been working on a series of trade defence remedies. These defences must include enforceable labour rights and the legal right for trade unions to take up international trade disputes directly rather than being reliant on our government, to raise it at the World Trade Organization, a body which has never been working persons' interests in their mind. At last year's conference, I stated that we would not accept a crisis caused by a government's cowardice, and that Theresa May brings to a halt the dumping of cheap, poor-grade steel and not bottle it. With the onset of Brexit, I make that call again, protecting not just steel but the whole manufacturing supply chain with a proper and fair industrial strategy. Please support this motion.
Thank you. Community. Sorry, not community, TSSA. Sorry.
Mick Carney, TSSA, President, Congress. Steel, like so many of our industries, is in crisis. Many years of failure to invest from the private profiteers, many years of neglect from the British government have taken their toll, and it's too easy to blame the EU for this failure. The German and Italian governments have supported their steel industry, so why haven't ours? It's simple, good old Tory dogma. Let the markets decide and screw those that fall by the wayside. Personally, I've always had the belief that we should take back all of the industries and utilities stolen from us by Tory governments. However, I respect the views of the unions that organise in the steel industry that say, at this moment, it's not the right time. And that is why TSSA withdrew its amendment. But for me, the destruction of the steel industry is personal. I'm from Middlesbrough, and despite nigh on 30 years in London, I am and remain a proud smoggy. My granddad worked all his life in the steel industry at Cargo Fleet. My dad worked and died in the steel industry, first in Middlesbrough and then at Corby, where he passed at work aged just 41. My first march and demonstration as a kid against the Toryist tax was on the steel industry in the early 80s, which was done to make it right for the coming privatisations. And I've seen the devastation of proud working men thrown on the scrap heap in Middlesbrough, and right the way across to the east of the River Tees, where back in 2015, 170 years of Teesside steelmaking was callously ended, throwing approximately 10,000 people on the Dole and the steelworks and its associated industries in Redcar. Teesside Steel built the Sydney Harbour Bridge, Churchill's War Rooms, and, for any Georgies in the room, the Tyne Bridge too. And now it's gone. I was only 5 when my dad passed. I don't know what he would have thought about what the Tories have done to our steel industry. I did, however, know my granddad well enough. And I know exactly what he would have said, and not one word of it's repeatable from here. Conference, please support.
Thank you. Congress, I'm now calling motion 7, Save Steel, for the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. I now call composite motion 3, Rebuilding the Finance Sector. The General Council support the composite motion. Moved by Accord, seconded by Aegis, and United have indicated that they wish to speak.
President, Congress, Jed Nichols, General Secretary of the Finance Union Accord, moving Composite 3, Rebuilding the Finance Sector. Congress, a functioning and accountable banking industry, is a facilitator of the economic growth that's needed for all of our futures. Composite 8 yesterday addressed the challenges of digitalisation and technological change. These factors, taken together with economic uncertainty and record low interest rates, mean that the environment for Britain's banks is as difficult as it ever has been. The UK has extended its position as the world's leading financial centre ahead of New York, Hong Kong and Frankfurt, but the uncertainty over Brexit is making the environment less stable. In this uncertain time, what banks think they can control is their costs. And this has led to large-scale branch closures, with banks disengaging from the communities that they're meant to serve. Business restructuring exercises with inevitable redundancies are seemingly constant, and outsourcing and offshoring are commonplace. Ordinary bank workers have faced pay restraint and cuts in their pensions and other benefits. And Congress, this is now the time to ask how the finance industry can best serve the British economy and working people. 10 years after the global financial crisis, some banks are still reluctant to lend to businesses. Lending is available to support a housing market that's increasingly out of reach of working people, and there's growing alarm at the scale of consumer credit as families struggle to make ends meet. But lending to businesses has been negative in 6 out of the last 8 years. Many working people are facing the most severe real earnings crisis in decades, and what the finance industry should be doing is supporting high-quality work that delivers productive growth and decent wages. We call on the General Council to examine the policy recommendations from the excellent report, An Economic and Social Audit of the City. But the banking sector employs far more people in branches, call centres and operations centres outside London than it does in the city. And we should support bank workers, but not their fat cat bosses, to build a better financial system, to provide decent jobs, to offer more support and value to the wider economy, and to create a banking sector that works for Britain. Congress, I move Composite 3.
Thank you. Aegis.
Congress, President, Brian McDade, Aegis, the union supporting Composite 3. Now, we all have this perception that those that work within the finance sector are on high pay, high bonuses and high benefits. For unions like ourselves and other unions that represent members in this sector, that is not the truth, and we recognise daily the reality is very different. When the financial crisis of 2008 hit society, public trust in the UK finance sector quickly dwindled, and quite rightly so. Whilst we all know that it was those at the top of these institutions that were culpable for the crisis, the impact on most workers in the sector has resulted in mass redundancies, low pay awards, pay freezes, the erosion of employee benefits, increase in working pressures, and increased regulations that make our members' day-to-day working conditions more stressful. A recent study found with 33,000 employees, finance workers are second only to those who work in healthcare, who lose an average of 27 days of productive time every year. The loss of productivity is estimated to cost the UK around £57 billion a year. Brexit may have a detrimental impact on the sector, where some UK-centred companies with business across Europe could look to relocate to other European financial centres such as Frankfurt, Paris, or in some cases Dublin. This will have an impact on our members' job security and continues the uncertainty that they face in their jobs. The threat of redundancy is ever present for our members, and it is now a common thing to be asked, when am I being made redundant, or can I be made redundant? We want to hear our members ask us every day, how can I grow in my job, and what can I do to have a long career in the industry? We need to support and work with employers to help our members have jobs and careers, not be constantly involved in the process of them leaving their jobs. It is also imperative that we focus on eradicating the apathy our members constantly feel in their jobs. Most of our members are those who are facing their customers each day, answering the phones, ensuring all the IT functions are operating successfully and all our finances are managed the right way. Therefore, it is essential that they work within the right environment, are rewarded and recognised for their dedication, their performance is managed consistently and fairly, and more importantly, they are proud of the industry they work within. We call on the TUC to work with bodies like the Banking Standing Boards, whose Deputy Chairman is an old friend, Sir Brendan Barber, and other organisations to raise standards of behaviour and competence in the UK sector, to facilitate change and help the sector deliver better outcomes for employees as well as customers and create a working environment our members can flourish within, not stagnate. A successful finance sector is essential for the growth of our economy, and the bloodline of that success are those members who work there for us. Congress, please support the motion.
Thank you. Very good speech. Unite.
President, Conference. In 2008, when the then Labour government bailed out the banks, it was done in an attempt to avoid the UK financial service sectors crashing, and in the main it did that. The major mistake at that time was the bailout was funded without placing any restrictions or conditions on the big banks' behaviours. Remember, it was them that caused the crisis in the first place. That left the lords of the universe, the bank chief executives, to carry on as usual. They continued to do what they had always done best, use the cash as an opportunity to squeeze our members even further. No one should be fooled. These captains of industry carried on as before, only this time, in the case of RBS and Lloyds, with taxpayers' money bolstering their grandiose schemes. They showed no regard or any sense of rewarding or repaying the loyalty to staff who'd helped them return to profit. They show no sign of any conscience in closing down bank branches in remote areas, leaving communities without banking facilities. And they will show no hesitancy in moving lock, stock and barrel out of the UK if Brexit negotiations don't suit them. In fact, this is already happening, and other EU countries are preparing to welcome them. The members we represent require a better financial system that works for those who work in the sector and the wider community, a sector that serves the many, not the few. It won't happen under this government, so we know what we have to do, don't we? Please support.
CWU.
President, Congress, Jane Loftus, CW President, to support Composite Motion 3. Over the past couple of days and on to tomorrow, we'll have spoken about what is broken in our society, what industries are broken, what services are broken, what financial problems there are, right across from transport to healthcare, welfare. We stand here this week where we look around us and we know that we are not in the best place. We know we are in a crossroads, and a crossroads that needs to go the right way. I believe Jeremy Corbyn and his vision of the future of the Labour Party and what Britain could look like, both here and internationally, is the way to go. Too long we've seen division, and too long we've been seeing the rise of racism and fascism and Islamophobia. All these are things and part of what our financial side should be. We should have access. The post office, at the time of privatisation of Royal Mail, the post office was kept in public ownership. The post office apparently was supposed to be growing, and it was there to show that not only the Tories but the government had listened to the public. What do we see in those 3 years of the post office? We've seen closures on the high streets, we've seen it starved of a vision, and we've seen it starved of investment. We, as a union, have been campaigning for a post bank. We believe that people have been left behind in financial services, and we believe the post office is vital to every community. We believe it brings cohesion, and we believe it does offer services that are relevant to people today. But as a public service, along with everyone else, The government, both within the coalition and now in a Tory government, don't believe there is a future in the post office. So we have seen closures. We are out there campaigning regularly every weekend to keep post offices open on the high street, and we've seen more franchising, a backdoor privatisation of the post office in any other name. But the union hasn't sat back. The union has put the case for the post bank, and I know Jeremy Corbyn and Labour Party support that. But also recently, along with the Cass Business School, we've actually put the meat on the bones of how that post bank could work. We haven't sat on slogans. We've gone out and realised and got the material there that says this can work. We can provide banking services on the high street, in the post office. And what that will do is keep the post office open on your high street, give our members valuable jobs that they deserve. And I'd like to thank everyone in here who have campaigned with us to keep those post offices open, to carry on doing that, but join us in the Post Bank campaign and make sure that no one is left out in our society from being able to have access to financial services on the high street where they live and not having to go just online, which obviously discriminates them. Support us and support everyone else fighting back. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Those are all the speakers now, so I'm going to put composite motion number 3, rebuilding the finance sector, to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to composite motion number 4, climate change. The General Council support the composite motion with an explanation, and I will call on Sue Ferns during the debate to explain the General Council position. The composite is moved by the Bakers Union, seconded by the CWU, supported by the FBU, ASLEF and TSSA. I will then call on Sue Ferns to give the General Council explanation. Other speakers indicated are Unite, Unison, Usdaw and Prospect. Can all the speakers please come to the front row, get your card swiped, so we can get you up on stage in a timely and orderly fashion. Thank you very much.
Congress President Sarah Woolley speaking on behalf of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union moving Composite 4. And I'm going to focus on the impact of climate change on the food system and the rigged energy system we currently have. Climate change is impacting the global system of agriculture, in which many of our members and the Global Union Federation, the IUF members, depend on for jobs, whether they are in producing, processing, packaging, retail or food outlets. Agriculture accounts for around 10% of greenhouse gases emissions in the UK. One side of the food industry that is often ignored is the process from soil to table. This includes transportation, which the ASLEF amendment points out is responsible for 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. Add to this product manufacturing, refrigeration, retail and the hospitality industry, including fast food outlets, the levels are actually far higher. And the need under the Climate Change Act 2008 to reduce these by at least 80% on 1990 levels means that climate change is arguably the biggest threat to workers' jobs today. We are witnessing the impact of climate change in increasing numbers of severe weather events, such as heat waves, droughts and floods. Storm Harvey in Texas stole the headlines not long ago, and more recently Irma, the largest storm on record. But devastating floods have ravaged many parts of the world in the past few months, including Nigeria and Sierra Leone in Africa, China, Nepal, Bangladesh and India, all resulting in loss of life, damage to infrastructure such as homes and schools, transport disruption and the loss of food crops, which are particularly volatile to climate change as extreme weather events affect international production, trade and supply chains. Moving on to energy, it is central to all our lives as workers and citizens within our communities, but the markets won't deliver the rapid energy transition needed to reach our 2050 targets. UK Energy was privatised in the 80s and 90s as part of the Thatcherite drive to privatise public assets in which what she famously called a share-owning democracy. The UK is fairly unique in having a fully privatised energy system, generation, transmission, distribution and supply. However, transmission is a natural monopoly and should be in public hands. This is so that we can redefine energy as a public good to achieve important public and social objectives such as development of renewable energy, control of non-renewable energy generation, universal coverage, affordability, efficiency and democratic accountability. Privatised energy companies have high profits and high prices and are not concerned with issues of energy transition and fuel poverty, which comes as a result of high prices, low pay and poorly insulated homes. Mass retrofit programmes should be part of the programme of public works to address energy poverty by making homes warmer and at the same time reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions. The Labour Party election manifesto said that we will stop our financial system being rigged for the few, turning the power of finance to work for the public good, and committed to transition to a publicly owned, decentralised energy system. The media often focuses on climate change levies as being the cause of increases in energy bills. However, little attention is given to the vast profits taken by energy companies such as the Big Six or network providers. Citizens' advice have been critical of the price-setting controls for energy networks by Ofgem, saying that it has gifted huge profits that consumers have to pay for through their bills. A later report stated energy consumers are subsidising £7.5 billion in unjustified profits made by the businesses responsible for the UK's gas and electricity networks over an 8-year period. As the Transnational Institute report highlights, there is a global kickback to reclaim public services from private corporations and show that ever-declining service quality and ever-increasing prices are not inevitable. There are many reasons for this, but largely a response to austerity politics and recognition that corporations deepen rather than address key social and environmental challenges. This includes climate change, and it's clear that we are not able to address the challenges of climate change and energy transition unless energy is under public ownership as part of the public sector function. This should be central to an industrial strategy that confronts the realities of climate change without abandoning workers to the market and profits as we see today in precarious work of zero-hour contracts and low pay. It is important that all sectors and unions look at the impact of climate change on their members' jobs and develop just transition programmes to safeguard workers' livelihoods and pensions, supported by environmental reps within the workplace. Please support.
Seconded by the CWU.
President Congress, Tony Cairns, Communication Workers Union, to second composite motion 4 on climate change, and to make ultimately pretty much the same point I made last year when we stood up here and you defeated a motion on climate change and we're open for a different outcome. I think it's somewhat ironic as well that we're having this debate on the back of Hurricane Irma and the damage that's caused. Let me deal with the science first and make one thing clear. Climate change doesn't cause hurricanes. What climate change does is make them inexorably worse. For the scientists among you, you'll know this. It's called the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. And what it means is, that for every 1% rise in the Earth's temperature, 7% more water goes into the Earth's atmosphere. That water's got to go somewhere. And what it does, it deposits itself in hurricanes and it floods countries like Bangladesh and like Cuba and like we've seen in parts of America. And what happens then? When the water hits the Earth, we have more floods. People go without food, people go without shelter, and we will end up with millions more climate migrants around this planet, and we have to do something about it, climate refugees. And what you see in the United States is complete denial of the science by Trump and his advisors, the same people who pulled out of the Paris Accord. And the Committee on Climate Change said that we need to reduce our carbon emissions by 2050 over 1990 levels by 80%. So change is coming. We've seen this week, energy offshore wind is now cheaper than new nuclear, and in some areas cost competitive with gas. And over the weekend, we've seen the first consecutive 24-hour period where this country went without the use of coal. And industry is going to change because 1/3 of all
carbon emissions in this country come from industry. And industry, to meet carbon emission reduction targets, industry will have to change. Actually, reduction from industry is going to be needed at around 70%. We've already seen some actions. We're talking about petrol-free cars. But if you're in energy-intensive industries like steel or the petrochemical industry, then the cost of fuel to you is over 50%. So those industries will change, and they're going to change with or without us. Government is going to change with or without us, and companies are going to change with or without us. But they're going to change for profit reasons. They're going to change at the worker's expense. And what we do in this composite is try to engage with every trade union to get on board and develop an industrial strategy and a just transition that makes sure that when climate change happens, this trade union movement in this country takes hold of this issue. Long overdue that we do that. Long overdue that everybody in this hall plays its part in developing a sustainable future for all of the people in this country and for all of the people on this planet. I second.
Thank you. FBU.
President, Congress and Ennoble supporting Composite 4. I want to thank the Bakers Union for putting climate change back on the TUC's agenda. It's absolutely vital that we keep discussing climate issues at Congress and for the TUC to maintain its profile on this work, whatever the other immediate pressures that are on us. That's because the threat of climate change is real and it won't go away. Even now, when the British government and the US government is stalling on climate issues, we as trade unionists and as internationalists cannot relent. They may want to ignore climate change, but as the recent floods in South Asia and the US and other events that have been mentioned previously, together with other weather-related disasters have shown, climate change should not and cannot be ignored. Firefighters continue to tackle the effects of climate change as part of our daily work, both in the UK and abroad, whether it's responding to floods and storms or dealing with fires, often made worse by the impact of droughts and heat waves. The FBU has continued our own campaign on climate-related issues in the UK. I'm pleased to inform delegates that we've had a further success in our campaign on flooding this year. After many years of campaigning, the Labour government in Wales has implemented a statutory duty on the Fire and Rescue Service to respond to flooding. This was achieved last April, and already the provision of new resources and equipment has been provided to our members for the next set of floods as and when they happen. This now means that Scotland, Northern Ireland and now Wales have that statutory duty. Only England is left to convince, and obviously when I say England I mean Westminster. We know that there'll be more floods and we know that the public expects firefighters to assist. So we'll keep our campaigning up on this issue. Hopefully with the election of a future Labour government, this task will become a lot less difficult given what appears to be widespread support amongst Labour MPs. We also want to thank the Bakers Union for raising the issue of public ownership and democratic control of energy companies, one of the biggest indirect factors in climate change. The FBU supports the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy campaign, which has raised issues of ownership and control of these companies and links together other trade unionists across the globe. This is important for living standards too. Putting profit before the environment is in the end both economic and environmental madness. 3 years ago, we published a pamphlet on public ownership of energy resources. We said it would make sense on climate grounds. We said it would make sense to get control of energy bills and fight fuel poverty. And recent price rises in gas and electricity have just shown that this government is allowing the industry to carry on with profiteering as before. We think it's time to renew our demands for the public ownership and democratic control. We believe that the TUC should take up those demands. We want the Labour Party also to make this a priority when it forms the next government. Please support the motion.
Thank you. Aslef.
President, Congress, Cliff Holloway from ASLEF's proud to support the motion. ASLEF, as you would expect, fully supports the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through the development of a sustainable transport policy for the UK based on improving the public transport sector and moving more freight transport from road to rail. The 2008 Climate Change Act established a target for the UK to reduce its carbon emissions by at least 80% from 1990 levels by 2050 to limit global warming to 2%. Transport is responsible for a quarter of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, so we see large cuts in transport emissions of carbon dioxide as being essential if the UK is to meet its climate change targets. This is a nation is spending billions of pounds on major new roads and airport expansion that will harm the environment and make the problem worse. We would like to see priority given to investment in public transport, which is vital to play a part in helping to reduce carbon emissions. Trams in city centres, for example, can reduce road traffic up to 14% and produce 3 times less much CO2 as by travelling by car. Our vision is for everyone to have access to affordable green transport options that protect the environment, improve commuters' quality of life and offer genuine alternative to the use of private cars. Unfortunately, our rail fares, and those of you that have travelled down to Brighton by train will obviously know, are currently amongst the highest in Europe, and many of our services are overcrowded and rely on worn-out stock, rolling stock. We believe that the UK government should replace the current fragmented system with a publicly owned, accountable railway that makes sure the system operates as a coherent whole. We need a railway that delivers for people and for the environment before profits and shareholders. Emissions could be also massively reduced by moving freight transport from roads to rail. A single freight train can remove 70 HGVs from our roads, and rail produces 76% less carbon than lorries. Moving goods around the country currently puts a lot of heavy lorries on our roads that were never designed for them. Network Rail has calculated that a tonne of goods can travel 246 miles by rail as opposed to 88 miles by road on a gallon of fuel. In spite of this, the environmental benefits, the amount of freight being carried across the rail network is falling, and job cuts have been announced in the rail freight sector across grades. This clearly demonstrates the need for better promotion of rail freight as a green alternative to lorries. We need councils to set firm carbon emission targets in their transport and economic strategies, and we need the government to develop future transport policies which bring train operating companies back into the public sector and which promote freight on rail for a better, more coherent, greener transport system. Acting on carbon will make our lives better in many ways. Reducing motor traffic will improve air quality and promote healthier lifestyles. The effects of climate change, as you know, are now being played out as our oceans are getting warmer and warmer. And as the General Secretary said in her address, we've got 150 years of the trade union movement. Let's just hope we've all got a planet to live on in that time. Conference, I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you. TSSA. Raise your right, thank you. Sue, can you give the General Counsel explanation, please?
Thank you. Congress has long supported action to tackle dangerous climate change and to ensure a plan for a just transition that protects the livelihoods of those working in the energy sector and in energy-intensive industries. We agree that action to tackle climate change can't be left to the market alone, and support calls for a government-led sustainable industrial strategy developed in consultation with unions that includes an energy strategy and a mass programme of retrofitting and stronger rights for workplace environmental reps. Greater public ownership of energy, for example at community level, could have a role to play in delivering our future energy needs. However, any such decision must be taken in consultation with workers and unions working in the sectors that might be considered for public ownership. So Congress, with this in mind, the General Counsel supports the motion.
Thank you, Sue. Right, Unite have indicated they wish to speak.
President, Congress, Andy Jones, Unite, speaking in support of Composite 4. Conference, there's an old saying that you may not be interested in politics, but politics are interested in you. The same is true of climate. That's a lesson Donald Trump is learning the hard way, at horrific cost to the American people. It's only 4 months since Trump announced that the US would pull out of the Paris Agreement, Yet as we meet here today, hundreds of thousands of people across Florida, Texas and the Caribbean are rushing to take shelter, or reclaiming their lives from the wreckage. These disasters show that it's always our people, working class people, who are forced to pay the price for government inaction. It's only right that our movement must play a central role in meeting the climate challenge. That means democratic control over our rigged energy system. That means an environmental rep in every workplace. It also means having trade unions in the driving seat to support our members in a just transition to high-skilled, low-carbon jobs. No one must be left behind, comrades, and every part of our movement has its role to play, including energy and transport, and we note the reference to moving more freight to rail, which must recognise that road still has a part to play in a proper strategy. And in my own sector, construction, for example, this motion proposes a public work programme for the mass retrofitting of insulation for our homes and public buildings. This would be a positive step and an economic shot in the arm, creating thousands of jobs in the low-carbon economy. But conference, the Grenfell tragedy and the scores of tower blocks which failed safety tests in its wake serves as a stark reminder. We will not accept cut corners. We will not put private profit over public safety. Such a programme must be safe and it must be public, involving workers and residents together. And such an initiative must be the start of an ambitious long-term industrial strategy which invests in a balanced energy policy, creates secure jobs and invests in reskilling workers. Please support the motion.
Thank you. Unison.
President, Congress, Nikki Ramanandi from Unison, supporting the composite. Congress, this motion is welcome and long overdue. The breadth of our public services means that Unison members see the effects of climate change at work. Whether working for the Environmental Agency and local government at the time of flooding, or the NHS staff seeing the impact of the rise in air pollution in conditions such as asthma. We were proud to support the Paris Climate Change Agreement and to lobby with the international unions for workers to be recognised in the final text. But why does a just transition to a carbon-free economy matter? I'm a trade union member who campaigns alongside my Unison brothers and sisters who work for the big energy companies and distribution networks like the National Grid. They have decent paying jobs secured by trade unions in communities where the alternatives are often bleak. They recognise that energy is an essential public service and should not be left to the market. They openly discussed with me and others options to improve public control and ownership of their industry. And for that honesty to discuss the future of their jobs and industry, we owe it to them to make the just transition real. Not a phrase to trot out to show our sympathy, but real government investment to help the companies shift to renewables, real jobs in their communities and real training for their new roles. We made that commitment to them at our conference this year when we agreed to lobby for a major shift to renewables in the investments of the local government pension scheme. And if you want a model of best practice about trade union trustees seeking sustainable investments, then look no further than the Environmental Agency, where the staff pension fund is world leading. I come from Newcastle, where our council is desperate to expand bus provision in a planned way to reduce congestion and improve the environment. The Tories' Bus Act is designed to shackle that initiative in our area. So much for the Northern Powerhouse. Congress, what unites Unison members from British Gas with health visitors, teaching assistants, nurses and housing officers is a hatred of fuel poverty. We have high energy bills and poor energy efficiency. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the world with some of the lowest insulation. It appalls me to say that the UK has more preventable pensioner deaths in the winter than Norway, Sweden and Denmark. So Congress, let's unite to say one death from fuel poverty is one death too many. Support the composite and let's make sure energy and climate change are taken seriously. I support.
Thank you. Usdaw.
Ian Dalton, speaking on behalf of Usdaw, first-time speaker at the TUC. and speaking in support of this composite. Congress, the issue of climate change is becoming an increasingly urgent one, as other speakers have pointed out. We've had, over the last few years, some of the hottest summers on record, and of course the increasing occurrence of extreme weather events. Yet, year after year, we see meetings of the world powers discussing climate change but failing to agree any serious measures to tackle this issue. And ultimately, this attitude is driven by the fact that they don't want to disadvantage those companies based in their countries whose industries emit greenhouse gases. Their attitude is to agree that climate change is an important issue, but the main responsibility for doing something about it lies with somebody else. Should we really be surprised, Congress, that that's their attitude? I think one of the themes we've had running through this Congress has been that the private sector employees and their allies in Parliament put making the largest profits first, and concerns such as our jobs, the cost of living and the planet are distant considerations to them. That's why the question of public ownership under democratic control is the key part of this composite. Congress, it's important that on these issues our movement should follow the lead of unions in the energy industry. By democratic control, though, we don't mean leaving the same old people at the tops of those companies in charge with some vague oversight. We mean real democratic control involving workers and trade unions in the energy industry, consumers and elected representatives, because that means a different set of priorities. That means protecting our communities from climate change and guaranteeing that every worker in those industries at present will still have jobs on their existing pay and pensions, and that will keep jobs in the new energy industries for people in the future as well. It also means making sure that workers, all of our members, can afford to heat their homes and don't have to make this choice of heating or eating, and we end the scandal of pensioners dying over the winter. This issue is far too important to be left to the market, because if it is left to them, they'll invest in whatever makes their profits the biggest, regardless of how destructive the techniques that have to be used are to our environment. What we need is a policy that develops an alternative that puts our members and our future members first. Please support.
Prospect.
Ellie Wade, Prospect, President, Congress. This is clearly a really important motion, and there's a lot in it to like. We support the composite and we welcome the General Counsel's statement. Prospect members working in the emergency services, environmental protection and in the energy sector are among those that have been at the front line of responses to flooding. Climate change must not be ignored, and we agree that to combat it, we can't rely on the market alone. It's clear that action by the energy sector will have a role to play, and actually it's already doing so. The Government's Committee on Climate Change reported in June 2017 that since 2012, emissions reductions have been largely confined to the power sector. Emissions from transport and building stock are still rising. The committee says that new policies are needed across the economy. By 2030, current plans would at best deliver around half the required reduction in emissions. And the motion calls for stronger role for the public sector, and it's certainly the case that stronger government leadership is required. Although it already intervenes in the energy market for nearly all fuel sources, including renewables, it doesn't do it in a transparent way that provides long-term certainty for investment. There is a debate to be had about what form greater state involvement should take. Prospect believes that debate must take in the interests of workers in the energy sector, including our members, and must be grounded in their expertise. Just transition is, of course, the right principle, but we need to be much better at explaining what that means, what a truly just transition would look like to the workers affected. Prospect members would certainly like to see increased funding for investment in skills and in R&D, for example. But this isn't just a matter for the public sector. There is a much broader industrial and societal challenge. We need to use all of our expertise, wherever it's located in the economy, and we need to bring people with us. Whatever approach we adapt, we must listen to workers in the energy sector, respect those technical experts, because our fellow citizens will not thank us if the lights go out or if they can't heat their homes in winter. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. RMT.
Greetings, Conference. RMT, Glenroy Watson. Thank you, President. I know there was some difficulty with the paperwork. I rise to support the motion as previous speakers have done. It's easy perhaps to have a go at Humpty Trumpty, but I'm not going to do that because I think there are enough people recognizing that Mr. Trump is probably being taught a lesson at this very moment. I really want to support the whole of the motion, but give some emphasis to the demand of representative at the workplace, creating another level of structures for us to fight with in regard to environmental rep. But I also want to say something about the global south, because at the end of the day, the motion talks about agreeing an international agreement about carbon emission. Well, that's all very well, but I think when we look at the effects that the current situation with the hurricanes are having, it's not enough just to be a fair weather friend, because at the end of the day, the situation and position that people in the South find themselves in is not only because of recent development around climate change, it's because of the continuing economical drain and disparity that has been going on for years. So part of that has to include the ability to build accommodation and have resource to combat climate change. It's not enough to just have a wishful thinking about that. So I think that part of this initiative about a global agreement, about an international agreement, about consulting with other trade unions around what does the trade union movement do, must include somehow an improvement in that situation. Otherwise, we will simply have a situation where it's fine in the north and disastrous regardless of the weather condition in the south. So we need critical thinking about that beyond just carbon emission. Thank you, comrades.
And finally, PCS.
President Congress, Chris Boff, PCS, very much welcoming the chance to support Composite 4, which obviously starts from the position that the scientific consensus is that climate change is real. Any rational person recognises that. Unfortunately, as other speakers have indicated, that doesn't extend to the Oval Office. And of course, Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris protocols and what we see around us confirms why trade unions need to talk about climate and why I think this debate is worthy of Congress's time. So very much agree with the comments made by previous speakers about the link between trade union activity and climate. The only point I wanted to add from a PCS perspective is that we welcome this motion because it creates the conditions for the much needed discussion within the ranks of the trade union movement and across unions about how we develop a common strategy on climate change. But it also helps us address and resolve the apparent contradiction that often arises in this debate between creating and defending jobs on the one hand and on the other hand cutting greenhouse gases and taking action on climate change. Because as trade unionists, there really can be no compromise on a union defence of members' conditions at work, whether it's the civil service, local government, steel, gas and oil industries. But it's clear equally that the threat to members' conditions across the public and the private sector, that the threat to the climate itself comes from the agenda of a Tory government, from a privatised and rigged energy market, and of course the transnational corporations, the fossil fuel companies who dominate the world energy economy. And it's this scenario that poses the real threat to the future of our members' jobs and conditions and poses a real threat to the planet itself. So PCS, like Unison,
many other unions in the public sector have an interest through advisory or regulatory or distributory activities. And we want to work with the unions, agree with Sue Fern's comment about, of course, this has got to be a discussion and agreement with unions in the energy-intensive industry who have the technical know-how, who have the union power, and, I should say, the political weight and influence to help set out what we mean by a just transition, based on public ownership, public investment at a government, industry, regional and local level, and based on a guaranteed protection of all workers in the energy-intensive industries as we make the much-needed but gradual transition towards a zero-carbon economy. So, by any means, I think that we all recognise this is a massive task in front of us, but I would say if we are honest, intellectually honest about the science and the consequences to our members and the human race, if this doesn't happen, then I don't think anything could be much clearer about the obligation we have as trade unions in the here and now to our members and future generations to attempt to put working class interests at the heart of what we mean by a just transition. On that basis, Congress, please support.
Thank you. So I'd now like to put composite motion 4 on climate change to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Congress, immediately after the close of business today, there will be a chance for young delegates to have a group photograph with the General Secretary and the President. Please stay behind if you would like to take part, young delegates. Young delegates. I don't know how you define that. I think you should self-define and self-select. That's right. I now call on motion 17, Defence, Jobs and Diversification. The General Council position is to leave to Congress. It's going to be moved by Moz Greenshields on behalf of the TUC Trades Union Council's Conference 2017, and it's going to be seconded by PCS. Other speakers, can you please come up to the front so we can get the debate managed in an orderly and timely way, are the CWU, Unite, the GMB, Prospect and Prospect. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Moz Greenshields, TUC JCC. Comrades, I'm very honoured to be the first delegate of the Trades Union Council's conference to move our motion 17, at Congress. Trades councils are unions developing solidarity in the community, do an essential job, particularly in these times of rapid political change. We're proposing that we need to seize the moment to tackle the big union and community issues of industry, jobs and skills. British industry has long been neglected and abandoned as capital has freely moved abroad for higher profit. In the last 4 decades, it has shrunk from 25% to 14% of GDP. 10% of all industry is in defence, high skill and high value jobs, subjected to cuts and tens of thousands of redundancies with much more to come. Except, of course, currently in the increasingly questioned £200 billion Trident programme. As well as coordinated industrial struggle for jobs, there is a clear economic and political need for a national industrial strategy in which defence diversification, the planned move from the production of armaments to socially useful products play a major part. There is growing opposition to British military involvement in apparently perpetual wars. The British arms trade with despotic regimes is under pressure. And of course, the future of Trident is nowhere near as certain as the parliamentary process of approval would like us to think. Congress has shared these concerns and positions over the years, but without defence diversification, all these have further implications for existing defence jobs. Diversification is more achievable now than it has been for decades. Firstly, leaving the EU means that next Labour government will be free to establish a state interventionist industrial strategy to rebuild manufacturing industry to meet the needs of our people. Jeremy Corbyn's commitment to this is well known, backed up by the establishment of a national investment bank. Secondly, workers involved in diversification need to be given the assurance and confidence that not only would there be no loss of jobs or skill, but these would be enhanced as part of the process. It will take time, investment and sustained political will by government. It needs a government prepared to make these guarantees, and for once we're able to point to a Labour leadership with our values. Jeremy Corbyn has promised, and I quote, a just transition for communities whose livelihoods are based in those defence sectors, so that engineering and scientific skills are not lost, but are transferred into more socially productive industries. In transitioning away from nuclear weapons, we do so in such a way that protects the jobs and skills of those who currently work on Trident and in the defence industry more widely. Thirdly, our trade union movement's role is central. It's not a matter of just leaving it to government. They'd need our active support to make it happen. We need to step up and coordinate our industrial struggles for jobs, while at the same time being central in constructing the industrial strategy agenda for a new Britain with new working class priorities. For the many, not the few, it would rely on the active participation of our trade unions, plant representatives and local communities, together with government. Our times are full of change, but they're also full of danger. We are deep in what Francis has described as class war, and this struggle is part of it. There will be profit-led forces who would want to kill a Labour-led interventionist industrial strategy, and particularly one which features defence diversification, just as they killed earlier diversification plans. For example, the inspirational Lucas Plan of 1976 and the much less inspirational model of the Blair government DDA in 1999, which ended up privatised with a hefty slice for US private equity company Carlyle Group. If we seize the time, we can defeat such forces and help build the political and economic structures and mechanisms. Alongside our industrial fight for jobs, we need the Labour Party to set up a shadow defence diversification agency as soon as possible, as part of the development of an overall industrial strategy with jobs and skill guarantees for inclusion in the next Labour Party general election manifesto. Comrades, we have the opportunity to force the direction and pace of change. The whole movement must use all our power to ensure it is not frustrated as it has been before. I move.
Thank you. CWU. Sorry, it's PCS supporting. Sorry, seconding.
Thank you, President. Congress. Dave Semple on behalf of PCS, seconding this very important motion because our members, including the civil servants in the Ministry of Defence and also staff and private sector contractors such as Babcock International, demand that we defend their jobs regardless of whether we're selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, regardless of whether we decide to renew Trident, and that must be at the absolute heart of the trade union's agenda for diversification of the defence industry. We firmly believe that diversification and a national industrial strategy, that is transitioning high-skilled, highly unionised workforces from military contracts into peaceful ones, is the best way to do this whilst defending all jobs. And we have examples from elsewhere around the world about how this sort of thing would work. We could start by imposing huge waiting times before any closures and redundancies. During this period, for example, which lasts 5 years for the closure of a US military base, employers could be compelled to discuss with the elected union representatives of their workforce about what investment is available and what redeployment options are within that company, and if there aren't any within that company, to then invoke a defence diversification agency to discuss what other options there are within the public sector. Failure of employers to engage with unions and with workforces in this area has been the historical undoing of defence diversification efforts. A defence diversification agency could compel that kind of engagement. It could also be a clearinghouse that ensures defence workers are high up the priority list when it comes to planning the development of high-tech jobs in green energy, space exploration and other sectors. Just transition is an approach that's gaining ground in many carbon-intensive industries, as we heard in the last debate. This is exactly the kind of approach that we need in defence. A shadow defence diversification agency, which is what the motion calls should be set up, would also be a valuable tool which, with the support of unions, could put pressures on employers and the Tory government to plan right now for transitions at the end of contracts. It could also help unions fight on issues like pay, because there are many groups of workers in this industry who are not particularly well paid and who do not benefit from the billions in profits that are reaped from their parent companies. There's also a broader point to be made. If Jeremy Corbyn becomes the next Prime Minister, as we hope he will, do we want a Labour government that's prepared to continue selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, knowing as we do the use they're going to be put to, which is not just about invading Yemen or suppressing democratic dissent within their own country, but it's also about suppressing trade unions and the free expression of the workers' movement within their countries. I don't think that we do. I don't think that we'll want to be selling weapons to China, Oman, Turkmenistan and other dictatorships. We know the consequences of the arms trade, but nor would we ever support the loss of a single job. What we absolutely must do is transition to peaceful jobs. That's what this motion calls for, and I urge you to support. I second. Thank you.
Thank you. CWU.
President Congress, Tony Cairns, Communication Workers Union, to support the motion. A defence diversification agency. I mean, some people are going to come up here as if this is something new. Actually, Tony Blair formed one in 1999. We had one in this country. Unfortunately, he privatised it in 2001 to Kinetic, and it just vanished. Yeah? But its idea was to focus on a just transition for communities. Its idea was not to lose engineering and social skills, and they were not lost. And it was to utilise socially useful production. If there's an argument for... the argument for this motion, and suppose this motion was made when you unanimously carried Composite 1 just over an hour ago. You want investment in a strong economy for all, is what we demanded at this TUC less than an hour ago. And what this does is to begin to set an agenda that says we can diversify away. Like the comrade who seconded it said, do we want to be the ones that sell arms to Saudi Arabia, that causing human catastrophe on massive scales in Yemen? Is that what we're defending? Someone's going to have to tell me that that's worth defending, because I don't think it is. What we should be doing is using the skills that exist that produce those type of weapons and those type of profits for big companies to invest in renewable energy, the things we talked about in Composite 1, to invest in a railway infrastructure, the things we talked about in Composite 1, in new housing, in a digital infrastructure, and to put the workforce and communities at the front of that debate. You see, when you talk about investment, this government can't find money to pay public sector workers. This government can't find money to invest in the health service. But if you want to suddenly drop a load of bombs somewhere in the Middle East, then this government finds the money. The money exists. What we need to do is a planned economy. We need to say that the first duty of any government is to defend its citizens. But we need to assess exactly what that means. And we need to do that alongside the other needs of the country. And that's what we mean by a just transition. That's what we mean by diversification. I was going to reference the excellent Unite report they did last year, but I believe the comrade from Unite is going to come in and do that. So I ask you this question again, and it comes from the issue of selling arms to Saudi Arabia. It comes from just saying we're going to defend those type of jobs come what may. Mark Thomas wrote one of his straplines, one of his books, is that the people who made shackles that go on prisoners, handcuffs, were made in this country. And the advertising slogan for the company that made them and wanted to sell them was, as used on a famous Nelson Mandela. That's the logical conclusion of where you go when you produce weapons that are designed to kill people. When in our own country, we're having difficulty educating people, housing people, and looking after their health. We support.
Thank you. Unite.
President Congress, Mafcon Unite, representing Defence, Aerospace and Shipbuilding Workers at Rolls-Royce in Derby, speaking on motion 17. Delegates, the idea of defence diversification is not a new one to Unite or its predecessor unions. Only last year, Unite published the most comprehensive report detailing our long history of members advancing ideas of new work and spin-off technologies, including the Lucas Aerospace Plan and Oceans of Work, the Barrow Shipyards version. This report shows the track record of success in the defence diversification in the UK is poor, and serious consideration must be given to a system with teeth and money if it is to be a reality. Much has changed in the global defence industry in the 40 years since the Lucas Plan, but this should not stop us using it as an inspiration. However, this needs to be tempered with the realisation that the current situation and an understanding of the experiences of the past. In 1976, I was 3. I'm now 43. I have grey hair and many years of lessons learnt. If there is a lesson to be learnt from the Lucas Plan, then it is this. Unless there is industrial and political will, such plans will fail and risk leaving UK manufacturing fatally wounded. Conference, in our document, Unite said that the creation of a Defence Diversification Agency is an objective worth pursuing, but it will not work in isolation. It has to be accompanied by detailed plans outlining legislation, funding and investment in order for it to be credible for all the key stakeholders, including existing defence workers in the UK. Conference, I want to make it very clear. Unite's position on supporting its defence workers and on the successor programme has not changed. We will engage positively in a debate about a Defence Diversification Agency. This must be on the basis of like-for-like job replacement for existing and future workers in the industry. Let me be clear, Unite will fight without reservation, without equivocation, without hesitation, to defend every single job of our members in the defence industry. Yes, there are deficiencies in the motion, but it is in line with our defence diversification document and supported by our aerospace and shipbuilding sector. So taking these points on board, we support motion 17.
Thank you. GMB.
President Congress, Justin Bowden, GMB, speaking against motion 17. Congress, one of the consequences of this motion would be to take away from thousands of workers the certainty of good unionised jobs that give them and their communities prosperity and economic security. The motion fails to address the issue of appropriate defence strategies to protect the security and safety of a nation of more than 65 million people in a very uncertain world. Britain is an island nation, nowhere near self-sufficient in either food or energy. The security of the nation and the well-being of its citizens requires strong armed forces equipped with the latest weapons to keep the sea lanes open and to deter threats. Parliament has already voted to renew Trident 14 months ago by a majority of 355. Labour's superb manifesto at the general election was explicit. Labour supports the renewal of the Trident nuclear deterrent, and the party kept hold of seats on the back of that commitment. This motion undermines Trident and the conventional defence industry through the back door, an industry employing over 250,000 workers and 4,300 apprentices, where average pay is £39,000, some 44% above the national average. Exactly the sort of well-paid, highly skilled jobs every one of us in this hall works to achieve and protect. The motion calls for the TUC and unions like GMB, with thousands of members employed in the defence sector, to campaign for an agency whose key aim would be to ask trade unionists to come up with ideas for replacing their own jobs, akin to asking them to become the proverbial turkeys voting for Christmas. GMB already listens to our members in the defence industries. We know GMB members take pride in their work and their skills. We know they are proud of the contribution they make to their industries, the economy, and yes, the defence of their country. Congress, the Lucas Plan was about saving jobs in the face of company redundancies. This motion risks encouraging redundancies. The logical conclusion would be to actually fuel the decline in manufacturing jobs the motion is supposed to prevent. Our members in defence would vote with their feet. GMB cannot support a motion replacing real, well-paid unionised jobs with uncertainty, insecurity and decline. GMB members in the shipbuilding industry and the defence sector are as vital to our security as the RAF's pilots or the Navy's sailors. Congress posturing on unilateral disarmament and neutrality undermines the security of our fellow citizens, as well as undermining the jobs and communities of our members. GMB cannot support such proposals. Please oppose motion 17. Thank you.
Thank you. Prospect.
Tom James, Prospect. President, Congress. The Lucas Plan was a universally accepted success, but it was a product of its time, when there was a much larger engineering and manufacturing base in the UK. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. We all see the dwindling manufacturing industry and are saddened by its decline. The companies working in the field of defence are not immune to this decline, and we have faced round after round of redundancies, hitting shipbuilding and aerospace particularly hard. I cannot speak to the processes put in place by my counterpart companies, but I know my company, working very closely with the trade unions, have produced a very robust retraining and resettlement process, which is in place whilst doing everything possible to protect and preserve jobs. The real problem is not the need for diversification. It is the trend of successive governments to give work to foreign companies who fail to deliver on their promise. The Mars ships given to Korean shipbuilders, that's military, afloat, reach and sustainability. Although I sometimes think Mars refers to the home planet, whoever thought it was a good idea to have the hulls built halfway around the world and then fit them out in the UK. The giving away to Lockheed Martin the contract to produce armoured fighting vehicles. They promised approximately 15,000 jobs would remain in the UK. The reality is less than 1,500. And most depressingly for me, the scandalous destruction of the Nimrod MPA-4, which if it had been accepted into service would have been the most advanced aircraft of its type in the world. Instead, aircraft to the value of £2.6 billion were chopped up with a JCB. Another British engineering success story. Defence needs a long-term strategy that will enable the industry and its workforce to plan with certainty and security. Prospectors welcome the government shipbuilding strategy published on 6th of September following the Parker report. It is particularly welcome that there is a commitment by government to work with unions to support the creation and sustainment of high-skilled jobs, along with modern apprenticeships and expansion of technician and graduate recruitment. However, there is still much that needs to be worked through. There will be many issues around this. The important issue around the intelligent customer role. If we have to deal with successful export strategy, we need the in-house skills. Difficult to achieve that with Brexit and civil service cuts. Furthermore, this announcement was swiftly followed by reports of further defence cuts, which I will not depress you with. So at a time when the UK clearly needs to be focusing on these significant immediate challenges in the interest of national security and current jobs, this motion is, to say the least, an unhelpful distraction. The defence industry doesn't need diversity. We need sovereign capability and contracts placed with UK companies, preferably mine. Please oppose the motion.
Thank you. Moss, you have the right to reply. 3 minutes, maximum.
Thank you, Congress. Thank you, President. Justin, this motion isn't about a defence strategy. This motion is about addressing the job losses that have already occurred and those that we know are planned in defence. This motion isn't about scrapping Trident. In 2000, Congress has already got policy on that. In 2013, you carried a composite on public finances that said, public finances can be improved by tackling tax avoidance and by scrapping and the replacement of Trident. Money saved by ending our nuclear weapons system could be used to sustain the process of defence diversification, vital to our manufacturing future. Such a policy would need to ensure that the jobs and skills of tens of thousands of workers in the sector were preserved. The motion is about a strategy to maintain skilled employment and protect pay levels, of using, not losing, technical knowledge. It's in the motion. Of job preservation, not job loss. Job loss that's affected GMB members already, as well as those of other unions. It seeks to establish a shadow defence diversification agency to work closely with the Shadow Department of Industry in developing an overall national strategy to stem job loss where it hasn't been stemmed before, to offer hope to workers threatened with redundancy, and I'm honoured to have been able to move this in what I consider our workers' parliament. So I'm asking you to support this motion for the many, not the few. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you. I'm now going to move motion 17, Defence, Jobs and Diversification. I'm going to bring it to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Will all those against please show? It's carried. Thank you. Can we now move to section 4 of the General Council report, Good Services, the section on education, from page 49. I call paragraph 4.4 and composite number 10, Education Funding Crisis. The General Council support the composite motion, moved by the National Education Union, seconded by NAHT, supported by AEP, GMB, Unison and EIS.
President, Congress, Kevin Courtney, National Education Union. Conference, we debated school cuts last year. And last year we forecast that school class sizes would rise, that subject choice for our young people would reduce with fewer children able to do arts, dance, drama, music. We forecast that hundreds of TAs and teachers would be made redundant or lose their jobs when they leave and aren't replaced. I regret to say all those forecasts were correct. We also forecast last year that while those changes would be bad for our staff, they would be worse for the children that we teach. We forecast that while class sizes would increase teacher workload, they would also mean children would get less attention. We forecast that while TAs would be made redundant, and that would be terrible for them, it would be horrible for the children with special needs who were going to lose that support. And we were right about that. But we also forecast last year that a parent movement could and would grow in the context of these cuts. And I tell you what, we didn't know how right we were going to be about that. Working together, our unions launched schoolcuts.org.uk, which told parents the truth about what was happening in their schools. Not the government's pathetic mantra that school funding is the highest it's ever been, or their pathetic line that we've got more teachers than ever before, but the real truth that we've got more pupils than ever before, that we don't have enough teachers and TAs to go round, and that there are significant real terms cuts in funding for each of those pupils. And even before Theresa May called the snap election, parent movements grew around the country, supported by all of our unions. They were growing. Meetings of 100, demonstrations of thousands in Brighton, in Newcastle, in South Gloucester, in Lancaster, and many more places. Head teachers, supported by their unions, wrote to millions of parents to draw their attention to our School Cuts website. The government tried to knock our figures. Tory backbench MPs tried to say that our figures were wrong, but the IFS, the National Audit Office, agreed with our figures. And then Theresa May called the snap general election. Labour's manifesto came out showing that their manifesto would put significant money into schools and every school would see a real terms increase compared with the cuts that we were forecasting for the Conservatives, and we updated our website to show that. That website, the work that we'd done, was influential during the election. A video that we put out seen by 4 million people, shared by 100,000 people, millions of leaflets distributed by thousands of volunteers. And Congress, because of the work of all of the unions involved in this coalition, we made a difference. Independent research suggests that nearly 750,000 people changed their vote during the general election because of school cuts. Tory MPs who were defending school cuts, saying they were the right thing, some of them were defeated. Candidates who stood in election opposing school cuts won their seats. So the situation is transformed, not just by school cuts, but by everything else we see around us, and the situation is now transformed. No one knows when the next general election will be, but every MP is worried about school cuts in that general election. We're expecting a funding announcement from Justine Greening imminently. We live in hope, but we're preparing for the worst. We think that there'll be no new money. We think they will try and sow confusion and want to talk about redistribution, but we think that schools, especially with the most challenging children, will find themselves cut yet again. And we think that our coalition of unions working on this can put this issue back on the top of the political agenda, alongside other public services and the pay freeze. Congress, we are working together, National Education Union, NHT, ASCL, Unison, Unite, GMB, along with parents mobilising to call a lobby of Parliament on October the 24th during the half-term. And we want there to be hundreds, thousands of parents, support staff, governors, head teachers there, putting pressure on every MP to demand that Philip Hammond sees the writing on the wall. We want a new settlement for our children's education in the November budget. We want a new settlement for schools and nurseries and colleges. We want parents to say to MPs, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance as the alternative. If you think that our children can wait for money to come in, we don't agree. Our children weren't even born, some of them, when this crisis happened, and we do not agree that our children should pay the price. We want the best education for all of our children. We want a new settlement for our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the NHT, please, the second?
President, Congress, Nick Brooke, NAHT. Seconding Composite 10 in the absence of our General Secretary, who is on the train back to London to brief MPs on the truth behind the statistics on school funding. I'm not sure who got the more enjoyable task. At the moment, schools don't have enough money. It's as simple as that. School leaders know it, teachers know it, governors know it, parents know it, and all of us have been very noisy about the issue. The noise we made together prompted the Secretary of State to accept that the current funding situation is insufficient and to reprioritise funding to make an additional £1.3 billion available to schools for the 2 years from April 2018. £1.3 billion is certainly a step in the right direction, but it's not enough, nowhere near enough. So we need to continue to be noisy, because when it comes to school funding, the Treasury is getting quieter and quieter. It is time for the Treasury to step up and protect children's education. And we need to get the message through to the Chancellor in time for the autumn budget, confirmed for the 22nd of November. And today, NAHT relaunches our Schools Funding in Crisis campaign. Our members will be writing to MPs, working with parents, governors and others to tell the Chancellor that his silence on school funding is unacceptable and, quite frankly, baffling. 7 out of 10 school leaders are saying that their budgets will be unsustainable by the 2019 academic year. The very year that Britain is supposed to leave the European Union. With all the uncertainty that comes with it, is the very moment that 7 out of 10 schools will cease to be able to balance their books. That's not sensible public spending, it's reckless. School leaders care deeply about the quality of the education that we can provide for children and young people. That's what gets them up in the morning, and that's what keeps them awake at night. And I know that parents are right behind us. Now it is time to harness the combined efforts of the TUC. The Treasury has got to dig deep to reverse the school funding crisis if we have any chance of protecting our world-class education system. Without fair and sufficient funding, the devastating impact of real-term cuts on schools will continue. Redundancies, a narrowing of the curriculum, an inability to invest in vital equipment, and a reduction in extracurricular activities. Colleagues, I strongly urge you to support this composite.
Thank you. AEP.
Kate Fallon, Association of Educational Psychologists, supporting Composite 10. President, Congress. The AP fully supports the campaign to stop the huge cuts that schools are facing. But Congress, the problem goes beyond school budgets. Schools function best, and children do best, when there is a wider team around the school. They sometimes need access to specialist support services. They need access to educational psychologists. Local authorities need the funds to ensure that those specialist services are available for all children and young people in all schools, regardless of their status. Now, politicians of all parties say that they believe in access to education for all. If so, they must surely recognise that some children also need specialist advice and support so that they can have access to education. And all school staff sometimes need specialist advice so that they can support the children's access. The right to education is a fundamental right of every child, enshrined within the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Our current government is not meeting that commitment. The data tells us, our members tell us, more and more children and young people are being denied access to proper educational provision because they and their schools do not have and can't afford access to the specialist advice that they need. In too many areas of the country, the increasingly fragmented education system and the pressures on local authority budgets mean that schools and colleges no longer have access to regular visits from educational psychologists, no longer receive the advice and support that their staff and children need. Congress, we all believe that education for all, free at the point of delivery, is a hugely important principle. This should also include access to educational psychology services. So we call on the government and local authorities to recognise that many schools no longer have free access to local educational psychology services. And we call on the government and local authorities to work together to make sure that funding is in place to allow at least termly access to educational psychology services, free at the point of delivery for all schools. Congress, please support this composite.
Thank you. GMB.
President, Congress. Gordon Gibbs proudly speaking on behalf of the GMB in support of the composite on education. Congress, GMB wholeheartedly support this motion. We've heard about the impact of budget cuts on school workers, and our school support staff members are on the front line. Without their services, schools could not function. But along with our sister unions, we have to battle academy change that won't cut executive waste, but they will cut side staff, business managers, caterers and teaching assistants. It isn't right that so many of our members are in constant fear of the next round of redundancy notifications or the next restructure. Quite frankly, it is an outrage. And with a huge per pupil funding gap looming, the situation will get even worse. It is not always appreciated how important school support staff are. They are the sector's hidden professionals. Many of them work far beyond their contracted hours just to keep the show on the road. Teaching assistants spent most of their time making sure children with special needs and English as an additional language can receive an inclusive education. In many cases, their specialist skills have been formally recognised, but it is cheaper to downgrade higher-level teaching assistants than it is to acknowledge the true value of their profession. When our members are under threat, vulnerable children will suffer. Since 2010, staff have had their pay review body abolished and their pay capped, with teaching assistants set to lose £9,000 in real terms by 2020. And half of all teaching assistants have faced violence in the workplace, but too often they don't get the support they need. Congress, no one should have to work under the constant threat of losing their job or losing their hours or not having violent assaults taken seriously by employers. But under the plans of the out-of-touch Tory ministers, support staff will bear the brunt of future cuts. We need real campaigning unity on behalf of all school workers because there is a real fight ahead. Congress, we are proud to support this motion and we ask for your support in defending the jobs and pay of school support staff in the months and years to come.
Unison.
President, Congress, Nicole Beresford, Unison, speaking in support of this motion. Congress, Unison welcomes this motion and the opportunity to add our support to this important debate. As you have heard, England's schools are now experiencing the largest real-term cuts in funding in more than a generation. That is not only unacceptable, it is shameful. The new promise of additional £1.3 billion for schools is proven to be false. As we all know, it is simply diverted from other parts of the school's budgets. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is not additional funds. So as schools' funding has fallen dramatically, class sizes have risen, subjects have been dropped, resources cut back, and teacher and school staff jobs lost and unfilled. It could not be clearer that unless the government put new money into the overall budget, all schools will face an impossible struggle to make ends meet. And what about the impact on the most vulnerable in our schools? Well, the brutal truth is that the most vulnerable are always most at risk from budget cuts, and Unison is well aware that teaching assistants, valued though they are often the first to go, leaving vulnerable children less likely to be supported in mainstream settings. In March, the Guardian newspaper reported on one school that was losing a third of their TAs to help plug holes in their budget, a third. But we know that teaching assistants not only cover the pupils with a dedicated education care plan, they also watch out for the vulnerable pupils that struggle but don't quite meet the bar for a dedicated plan or haven't yet made it through the process of applying for one. While pupils with special needs are at risk of being turned away from mainstream schools across the country, the irony of the situation is that the government knows that educating pupils in special schools is far more expensive. Like every other budget cut under this Tory government, their insistence on dramatically inadequate funding will harm everyone who relies on the service, but particularly the most vulnerable. And we know that funding cuts in England have a knock-on effect for funding in Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland schools too. If the government failed to grasp the importance of school funding, a whole generation of children will have a severely restricted education. That is not opportunity for all. In fact, Congress, it is quite the opposite. Our overworked and undervalued school staff deserve better, and our children deserve the decent education that can only come with adequate funds. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you. EIS.
President, Congress, Stuart Brown, Educational Institute of Scotland. I'm very pleased to speak in support of this composite motion. There is, I believe, a moral imperative behind funding education, and further to this, that it makes economic sense to do so properly. It is an investment in our future. It is payment towards the society that we all wish to see. I attended the National Education Union Fringe meeting this afternoon, and I was so inspired by the example outlined of collaborative campaigning between teachers, unions and parents groups. What has been achieved so far by the Fair Funding for All Schools campaign is to be commended. Through meaningful collaboration, a shared cause, teachers and parents were able to make a remarkable and a tangible impact on the result of a general election. And they did it in a way that was modern, vibrant and engaging. As was expressed at today's Fringe, the work of this campaign continues. The crisis in school funding remains acute. In Scotland, we too face a funding crisis. Although we in the EIS are encouraged by the recent decision of the Scottish Government to lift the public sector pay cap, we know that cuts to education run far deeper than the erosion of teachers' pay. Rising class sizes, less support staff, both teaching and non-teaching, and a decline in teacher numbers, these are the effects of cuts to education funding. And make no mistake, Congress, that is a crisis. I see the sharp end of cuts through the many of the members I support, overworked, highly stressed, and if not beyond, at breaking point. Trying their best to deliver for young people, professional to the core, but crumbling under pressure that results directly from funding cuts. It is sadly not surprising that a recent survey by Bath Spa University into Scotland's teacher workforce found that 40% of 5,000 Scottish teachers were considering leaving the profession in the next 18 months. These cuts also adversely impact upon young people. Bigger class sizes mean less one-to-one time with a teacher, less learning support means greater challenges to be faced by those who need support most. Congress, when seen in these terms, it is clear that the interests of teachers, support staff and parents are not exclusive. Cuts to funding damage both the workforce and young people. The lesson of the Fair Funding for All Schools campaign is that together unions and parents can effect positive change for young people. Congress, I ask strongly that you support this motion and put the collective strength of our movement firmly behind teachers, support staff, parents, and most importantly show that it is the trade unions that are on the side of young people and that it is the trade unions that are fighting for a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you. So I now am going to put composite motion 10 to Congress, the education funding crisis. Will all those in favour please show? All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I now call motion 52, excessive and unnecessary education workload, setting pupils a better example. This will be moved by the National Education Union, seconded by EIS. Unite and the NASUWT have indicated that they wish to speak.
President, Congress, Niamh Sweeney, the National Education Union. I recently tweeted, "Will the last person leaving the education profession please turn the light off?" It was a joke, a response to yet another colleague announcing that they were quitting their job. But it isn't funny. It's a serious, stark and graphic reflection of the biggest recruitment and retention crisis education has ever faced. And today, even the DfE agreed with that. There are intrinsically linked causes to this crisis: funding and investment, a decade of pay cuts you've already heard about. Add to that a flawed accountability system, a testing and exam system that sucks the love of learning out of everyone, the omission of special educational need and disability in government educational policy, and the highest level of mental health illness in both our profession and, most concerningly, our young people. All of this leads to excessive workload and professional burnout. The DfE's own workload survey highlighted that teachers in England work in excess of 54 hours a week, leaders over 60, and support staff way beyond their contracted hours. Several years ago, I took a major step to save my career. I went part-time. This had a huge impact on my earnings and my pension, and a huge impact on how some view my commitment to my profession. I made the decision to work 4 days so that I could work unpaid at home on day 5, in order to remain in the profession that I love, and I have to say I'm bloody good at. I did it in order to save my relationship with my partner and my family. I did it to save my physical and mental health. Too many education professionals are taking this action, the only option they feel left open to them. I've worked in an establishment that had a 25% turnover of staff each year. I now can jokingly recall it the dark side, but at the time, it had an awful impact on my workload, and I considered leaving the profession that I love. It was directly linked to workload pressure and micromanagement, as school leadership grew less confident in an accountability system that could, in one visit, end their career and lose the establishment its reputation. It is a disgrace that school and college leaders have less job security than Frank de Boer. Sorry. High staff turnover leads to an increased workload for those who remain. I have seen too many excellent professionals leave for good and too many burn out and suffer ill health. We have never said that we should not be accountable as a profession, but the current inspector at Ofsted must acknowledge that it has been one of the biggest drivers of excessive workload. And it's really not helpful for them to blame tweet senior leaders in education, asking for suggestions about what SLT can do in schools to reduce workload. Ofsted, sort out your own accountability first. You may have published a myth-busting poster and leaflet, but you created the entrenched micromanagement culture in education. You are the cause of the most of the useless, busy data work for education professionals. As the National Education Union, we will campaign and organise on the issues which matter most, empowering our members through our workload campaign to say yes as well as no. Yes to the tasks that impact on progression and achievement, and no to the meaningless, data-driven tasks that have no impact on the love of learning. When education professionals from school and college leaders, teachers and lecturers, and our essential support staff are given the autonomy to make decisions that they are trained and experienced in doing, workload will decrease. The National Education Union gives us a chance to take back ownership of education, our profession, our job roles, and our classrooms. Our children and young people deserve a better educational deal, and our profession deserves to be listened to. We are the leaders in educational research and practice. We are leaders in innovation, and we are the leaders in our classrooms. I move.
Fantastic. Thank you. EIS.
President Congress, Susan Quinn from the Educational Institute of Scotland, seconding motion 52. And you might be surprised that a teacher from Scotland is seconding this motion, given that as a result of the 21st Century Agreement, our working week is protected under the Scottish Negotiating Committee's Code of Practice on Working Time Arrangements for Teachers, which outlines just how a teacher in any Scottish establishment should be able to manage their work in a 35-hour working week. Yet, like our colleagues south of our own border, recent surveys show that class teachers and managers alike are regularly well beyond this time. Indeed, as my colleague said previously, independent research shows that 40% of our colleagues are so scunnered that they were considering leaving the profession in the next 18 months. An already understaffed system for such a prospect is simply unacceptable. So how can it be that this 21st agreement that we have, the Code of Conduct, isn't making a difference when our employers signed up to it and they are supposedly committed to the reduction in management of our workload? Well, we've seen the implementation of CFE with the revised curriculum and revised qualifications at a stage where minimal additional time was provided.
In a 13-year period, only a couple of extra in-service days to manage the whole 3 to 18 curriculum to be developed, implemented and embedded across new strategies for all. During this time, the EIS regularly made requests for additional time or delays, and these were not always accepted, in fact, rarely accepted. Getting it right for every child, an ASN policy and other implementations across the system mean that our classrooms are stretched. The policy documents always recognise the need for resources but never quantify these, and therefore we are left to get on with it within our working day. 5 years ago, our own Cabinet Secretary spoke at the EIS conference and indicated that he understood the workload issues. He set up a working group which reported twice on this matter, and yet still no difference. So why in 5 years have we not seen a reduction in our workload? Well, we continue to have to implement new curriculum development, new qualifications, to take on board the stresses and strains of the poverty gap, and we have to do this all within our 35-hour working week. They give a nod to the recognition that increased number of special interest groups are having an impact on our lives, but won't do anything about it. Indeed, we were surprised to hear that Scottish Government have even managed to sponsor their own Maths Week for Scotland, which really makes no sense to us. No one is coming up with practical solutions for the tackling of bureaucracy. So colleagues, Scottish teachers, conditions may be managed north of the border, but some sort of workload impact assessment on all education policies will make a difference to us all. Please support.
Thank you. Unite. Unite.
President, Conference. Philippa Marsden speaking in support of motion 52 on behalf of Unite the Union. Congress, I don't think I need to remind you that education is vital in our society and for all our futures. A high-quality education can ensure each child and learner has the opportunity to discover and achieve their potential. But we cannot do this if our education staff, our teachers and our support staff are battling through excessive workloads and struggling with real pay cuts. I work in education, and as do so many of people I know. I'm also a county councillor, and I despair at how discussions have become dwarfed, referring to outputs and league tables and statistics, but really the children whose futures are in our hands. A discussion that has been shaped by marketisation and privatisation in the sector that forces have also led to education staff being underpaid. I see firsthand how those I know working in education are working up to 20 hours extra per week, their evenings and their weekends eaten up by the bureaucracy that is needed to keep this market operating, despite it not providing school places, the quality of education and the accountability that children and our communities deserve. Other speakers have already highlighted the detrimental impact of this on the mental health of education staff. We all agree that we need an education workforce that is highly motivated, skilled and is able to impart their passion and knowledge to support learners and enable them to develop. Yet we have dedicated education workers who are exhausted, who are unable to take breaks, who are unable to spend time with their families. Just today, my sister, a former teacher, has said, exhausted teachers can't teach properly. The most important thing for a class is that their teacher is well rested and physically and emotionally well when they stand in front of them each day. A tired teacher cannot deliver to the best of their advantage, even with the best planned and detailed lesson. And as the motion highlights, they are battling against the odds to deliver high-quality learning. As trade unionists, we should be concerned that not only is this hindering children from having the best education they can, but we're also sending a signal that this is what to expect from the world of work, and they deserve better. Conference, please support this motion and its call to pressure the government into immediate action on this important issue. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. NASUWT.
President, Congress. Alison Morgan, NSUWT, the Teachers' Union, speaking in support of Motion 52. Congress, that workload is an issue for teachers is now not under dispute. There is overwhelming mountain of evidence that teachers' professional and personal lives are blighted by excessive workload. And I myself witness this daily through my work as a local secretary for the NSUWT. In the NSUWT's Big Question survey, 4/5 of teachers stated that excessive workload was their #1 issue, with the key cause of excessive workload pressures being marking and assessment systems being created by schools in order to fulfil the demands, whether actually perceived or actual, of the high-stakes accountability regime rather than to benefit pupils' learning. The cumulative impact of year-on-year increases of teacher workload is really taking its toll upon teachers, with 3/4 of teachers recording very high levels of stress, leading to 2/3 expressing concerns over how this is impacting on their mental health. In a separate survey commissioned by the NSUWT and carried out by the independent polling company Conres, 69% of teachers said that they were always or often tired at work, and 48% said that they had no control over the work they were being asked to do. And as we all know, that leads to excessive stress. Given all of the above, it is not surprising that 73% of teachers said they could not recommend teaching as a career, a rise since the first Conres poll of 2013, which was just 16%. It is also not a shock that NSUWT evidence showed that 60% of teachers have seriously considered quitting the profession in the last year. Workload is directly leading to a recruitment and retention crisis unseen since the later years of John Major's government. The NSUWT has ensured that workload is at the top of the Westminster government's agenda since 2011, using this research commissioned by the union as the basis for this claim. The NSUWT is continuing to press the government to address the workload burdens which are blighting the profession through pursuit of also our union's national trade dispute. And this has been allied by the action that ordinary NSUWT members have been taking since 2011, day in, day out, by taking action short of strike action and, where necessary, strike action, to act in defence of teachers' terms and conditions, to ensure that excessive and unnecessary workload is curbed in schools. Without this action of the NSUWT, the workload pressures which some teachers face would be much worse than they are now. Congress, being able to rest and recharge is vital in maintaining energy, enthusiasm and morale. And as role models, our pupils should see us say enough is enough.
Can you come to a close now?
Yes, thank you. The government must commit urgently to the action necessary to bring downward pressure on teachers' workload and working hours, to stop the drain of exhausted, burnt-out teachers, to retain teachers, and to restore the work-life balance of teachers that they so richly deserved. This can only lead to better outcomes for all the students that they teach. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to move motion 52 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Congress, unfortunately, we're just running a little behind schedule, and I do want to take composite motion 14 today. So I'm asking that you agree to suspend standing orders for 10 minutes extra to allow us to take this into today's business. Are you happy to do that? Thank you. So can we now move on to, I call paragraph 4.5 and motion 53, post-16 education. The General Council support the motion. Moved by UCU, seconded by the National Education Union, and Unison and the NASUWT have indicated that they wish to speak. Can you come up to the front to make sure we can take the motion in a timely and orderly way? Thank you.
President Congress, Jana de Groot, President of UCU, moving motion 53. There is a saying that knowledge is power. And as trade unionists, we know how to use knowledge, that is, information and understanding, to support and empower members and to build our struggles and our campaigns. but it also works the other way round. Power is used either to support access to knowledge or to restrict it. From austerity cuts to school testing, from the abolition of the education maintenance allowance, from cuts to colleges to attacks on student funding and the teaching of English as a supplementary language, we know how government is currently using their power to provide resources or, in fact, to take them away from education, as with health, transport and public services. In post-16 education, we have faced and continue to face major attacks on colleges and universities and, outrageously and appallingly, on student access to post-16 study and qualification. Our government, this government, not our government, is doing massive damage to people's life chances and to the very skills that they claim to support. This is why UCU welcomes the Labour Party's proposal for a new national education service, which would be a step towards a proper cradle-to-grave education system free at the point of use. That proposal had a key role in the surge of support for Labour at the last election, partly expressing growing concern by young people and their families about the rising cost of post-16 study and a wish for a fair, inclusive education system publicly funded. UCU argues, as it has long done, for a post-16 education to be publicly funded as a public good, for lifelong opportunities, learning opportunities to be available to all, support for access courses, for the Open University, for adult and prison education. It wants no money barriers to participation. It wants learners' rights to have the well-supported, properly trained workforce providing the education that those learners deserve. Labour's commitment to abolish university tuition fees was also central to their appeal to voters and matches my union's long-standing policy to end tuition fees and to use the tax system to get business to pay their share of funding for post-16 education through a business education tax. Growing fees have begun to discourage anyone with limited resources from applying to university. The 2016-17 UCAS figures saw a 4% fall in university applications from home students, creeping discrimination and exclusion. Now, it's claimed that we can't afford public funding of tuition fees, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which is not exactly a progressive radical body, has shown that if the cuts to corporation tax made since 2010 were reversed, it would produce £12.4 billion, which would more than cover the cost of restoring direct funding and maintenance support for higher education students. In the same way, UCU knows that direct funding for further education is also good for students, is good for communities, good for the economy. Every £1 of spending on further education produces a £25 return. We give equal support to the principled case for a post-16 education free at the point of use, the right thing to do, and to a hard-headed economic case for investment in further education. We argue that students should get meaningful choices of pathway to learning with equal value for academic, technical and adult learning, all of them sustainably resourced. Students deserve the chance to learn by working with staff who are decently paid, properly treated and not ground down by insecure employment and workload stress, racism and gender injustice. Students deserve such a system. Staff deserve the pay concessions and support to do their best for students. Family and communities deserve the benefits that this brings. Congress, lifelong education is power. Knowledge is power. And power in the hands of working people changes the world. I move.
Thank you. National Education Union. It's getting late.
President, Congress, Josie Whiteley, National Education Union. We're very pleased to second this motion And I'd like to focus on the issues of forced maths and English GCSE resits and also staff training needs in post-16. Actually, teachers and lecturers don't mind if their students sometimes fail. Failing is all part of the learning process, and you can learn a lot from that experience. However, they do mind when a government policy forces them to sign up a student for an exam that they are highly unlikely to pass. Imagine you want to study a performing arts vocational course at an FE college, but you are forced to sit an A-level in, shall we say, randomly chemistry, just because Michael Gove thinks it's good that you do that. You have to repeatedly sit that exam until you pass it, but you never pass it, because actually not every member of the population ever could. And I include myself in that. How does that make you feel? The post-16 sector accepts that students need maths and English qualifications, but these have to be fit for purpose. I use percentages regularly in my work, but I've never needed to use quadratic equations since the day I took my maths O-level. Some young people fare better when they're studying more practical qualifications in maths and English, and these give them relevant skills that they will need both personally and in their working lives. The current funding rules in FE do not acknowledge this fact, and those who have failed their GCSE cannot have their vocational courses funded unless they resit their maths and English again and again. As only about a third of them pass these resits, we can safely conclude, I think, that this system is not working, and it affects motivation and the mental health of many, many young people who consistently feel they are a failure. Evidence shows that students can develop literacy and numeracy skills via different types of qualification. The government just needs to understand and accept that is the case by listening to education experts. But we all know the government dislikes experts. I need to confidently report that in FE colleges, we love them. We want experts teaching our students, we want experts designing and developing the curriculum, and we want to teach the next generation of experts. So as the government plans to introduce T-levels, well, how about involving us in the process? You could use our teaching expertise and could also perhaps invest in our training and development to ensure we have a fully up-to-date, highly skilled workforce in the post-16 sector. The number of 16 to 18-year-olds is set to grow significantly over the next decade, yet post-16 has faced a reduction of £1 billion in funding since 2010. Now is the time to invest in FE, rather than bribing the DUP. At a time of such uncertainty for our country, we need the resources to fully prepare our young people for their futures. FE staff must be funded properly to ensure those who are teaching qualifications, such as the proposed T-levels, are absolutely up to date in relevant techniques and are trained on and have access to the latest equipment used in their industries. As the TUC General Secretary said yesterday, in this digital age, workers will need new skills on a scale never seen before. That includes FE staff. I second the motion and ask you to support.
Thank you. Can you keep my mic on, please? Can you keep it on low? Because when people are going over, they can't hear. Thank you. Right, can we have that unison, please?
I'm not that small. Congress, Andy Beach, unison. I'm pleased to speak in support of this motion on an issue I care passionately about and the vital difference an education can make. Education should be open to all and without a price tag attached or a future burdened with a crushing debt. Where colleges, universities and workplaces are all places we can learn and be part of a system of lifelong learning that helps us grow as a people, it opens up life chances and builds up on our potentials. But education isn't just about learning your skills for the future, it's about our pasts. And we all know we have to learn from the mistakes of the past, or whereas we end up revisiting them in the future. Further education and vocational qualifications are not the destinations of the privileged, which is why we should ask the UK government why the adult skills budget has been slashed by 29% since 2010, and why the further education sector has been placed in a financially perilous position, and also why the government prefers eye-catching announcements about millions of new apprenticeship places, but which have not have the rigour or resources they need. It makes a mockery of the promise that effort, talent and promise will be rewarded. But we all know this too well in unison, because many of our members who have returned to adult education and adult learning have been often made to feel that universities are not for them, or that circumstances have stood in their way. We have seen a dramatic fall in numbers of adult learners and part-time students, and part-time learners have declined 61% since 2010. Unison and sister unions try to remove the barriers to learning in every way we can, but financially starving further education raises barriers. Tuition fees raise barriers. Abolishing maintenance grants raises barriers. The end of properly resourced and independent career services raises barriers. And the removing of NHS bursaries for nurses raises barriers, and in my opinion is bloody stupid. Unison believes that the Westminster Government should look to the efforts by Scotland and Cymru Wales to develop a more cohesive and further higher education system. Congress, this motion points the way to make this a political reality in England too. Please support this motion.
Thank you. Any SUWT?
President, Congress, Alan Hackett, NASUWT, the Teachers Union, speaking in support of motion 53. Congress, high-quality public post-16 education must underpin any industrial or economic strategy that seeks to secure the future long-term health of our economy and our society. Congress, with the backdrop of Brexit, this is surely more important than ever before. Since 2010, we have seen prolonged and devastating attacks to post-16 education in England. The sector has been placed under great pressure due to the legacy of heavy cuts since 2010, the removal of the education maintenance allowance, concern and confusion created by the local area review processes, which continues to threaten significant numbers of college closures and mergers. Confusion around government plans for full devolution of FE funding, the continuing expansion of the FE student loan system, and the wide-ranging attacks on pay and conditions. NASUWT members in sixth form colleges have faced deep cuts to their budgets. Major structural changes, including widespread privatisation and marketisation of education, coupled with the relentless denigration of teachers' professional competence, status and qualifications, and increasing job insecurity. Cuts to post-16 education funding have meant that the entitlement to a quality education that young people should have had has been seriously compromised. Congress, we believe that the failure to protect and enhance post-16 funding is economically short-sighted. High-quality post-16 provision is critical to ensuring young people have the skills to meet changing and global economic needs. Congress, we need to restore the education maintenance allowance, which did so much to ensure that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds were able to remain successfully in education, develop the skills, and pursue their aspirations. And Congress, we need to properly invest in the post-16 workforce and commit to establishing a system which recognises and develops teachers as professionals. A world-class system cannot be sustained where there is no guarantee of quality professionals working in every institution. A national framework of professional requirements and standards, underpinned by a framework of professional terms and conditions of service, is critical to ensuring quality for all young people.
Can you
Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I move motion 53, post-16 education? All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Congress, thank you for your indulgence. I now call composite motion 14. Can all the speakers please come down to the front? It is going to be moved by Unison, seconded by the SCP. Other speakers are CSP, BOS and Unite. Please come down to the front and be ready to speak quickly after the last speaker. Thank you very much.
President Congress, James Anthony from Unison, moving composite 14. And thank you, Conference, for voting to stay behind longer just to get to hear me speak. I feel very honoured. So, Congress, we hear all week about the impact of austerity is having across society and public services, with the most vulnerable bearing the brunt. Nowhere is that more clear than social care, which has been on the critical list for decades due to increasing demand and failed policies of privatisation and fragmentation. Service users have been let down. Austerity cuts to council budgets have only amplified this, as cash-strapped councils have cut to the barest essentials of funding, seeing the rise of 15-minute care visits, a disgrace to this country. As well as failing the vulnerable, there is then ever-increasing pressure on the NHS. The NHS I'm proud to nurse in is in crisis. It feels like last winter never went away, and now NHS providers are warning that this winter could bring disaster without an urgent government bailout. The Department of Health response has been to ask the NHS to think the unthinkable in cash-strapped areas, axing services, treatments and beds that they know are vital. Congress, there's a reason that those things are unthinkable. Of course, there's also this apparent silver bullet of health and social care integration. And Unison will always support integration where it genuinely improves services. And there are some great ideas and collaborations happening out there. But these need funding and support. Austerity sucks out much of the good from integration and too often leaves it as a cover for cuts. And Congress, as always, it is the staff that are just about holding the system together. Care workers in Unison tell us that they're staying over their time to get the work done and then using their own time on top of that to do the shopping and helping the cleaning for their service users. Too often not even getting the minimum wage, too often on 0 hours contracts, and now with the government refusing to even implement their rights to the minimum wage during sleep-ins. NHS staff who are seeing their training budget slashed and without a decent pay rise for 7 years, with the lowest paid in the NHS in Northern Ireland, now reliant on increases in the national minimum wage for their pay increases. Congress, that is an absolute disgrace on the government. But social care and the NHS have been relying on EU migrants to run. It's terrible, really, isn't it? They come over here, try and look after our sick and our in need. But with the threat of Brexit means that many of them aren't coming, and actually many of them are leaving. But it isn't all bleak. We have had some significant victories. Unison with our sisters in other unions have frustrated many attempts at privatisation since Lansley's hated health and social care bill came in, from cancer and end-of-life services in Staffordshire to last week's announcement that we have stopped NHS professionals being privatised. More and more councils are signing up to Unison's Ethical Care Charter, an ethical care charter that ends 15-minute care visits and delivers a real living wage to the carers that provide it. Unions together have delivered a real living wage for NHS staff across Scotland and Wales and in some NHS employers. And we've previously heard Holyrood and now the Westminster government saying that they are going to end the pay cap. Well, do you know what, Congress? Those words mean nothing if it doesn't put a penny in the pockets of our members. The penny in the pockets of every one of our members. The nurses like me, but the medical secretaries that enable me to do my job. The cleaners that clean the hospitals and the clinics that I work in. If it's good enough for a pay rise for nurses, it's good enough for a pay rise for absolutely every one of our health and social care members. Congress, we have one clear message on that, and that's pay up now, lift our members out of poverty. Otherwise, we will take action and we will defeat this government. Congress, if we want social care and the NHS to be there when you need them, then you need to be there now for us. Please support Congress, I move.
Thank you. SCP.
President, Conference, Casey Collins, the Society of Chiropodists and Podiatrists, seconding Composite 14. Congress will be aware of the huge gulf in the provision of social care for those who can afford to pay for it and those who cannot. In a recent poll of doctors in England, 92% did not think that enough social care is available to stop patients ending up in emergency departments or to avoid them having to stay in hospital despite being medically fit to leave. Almost as many, 88%, said big reductions to the social care that local councils are able to provide to older and disabled people have contributed to the pressure, and the same number believe social care services, which are intended to help people remain safe and well supported at home, offer an inadequate level of care for their patients. The Care and Support Alliance, which commissioned the poll, said chronic underfunding of social care had increased the burden on the NHS. Indeed, over the past several years, NHS podiatry departments have reprofiled their patient caseloads, discharging patients who require simple foot care, such as nail cutting, as this is now considered a social care need, according to the clinical commissioning groups. However, very little, if any, provision is put in place to then assist these patients, many of whom are vulnerable, to then get this social care need met. Many dedicated private practitioners are trying to offer these patients a service, but they obviously need to charge to be able to run their businesses, which means many patients struggle to afford this. The government's vision for the sustainability and transformation plans is to deliver healthcare closer to home in a more efficient manner. The action of the NHS podiatry departments under the direction of the CCGs is in direct conflict with this ideal. Councils in England claim £3.5 billion has been taken out of the social care system since 2010, and as a result of austerity-driven cuts to many local authority budgets, some 500,000 people who would have received social care in 2009 no longer qualify for it, despite the ageing population. The Society's private practice members are reporting that they are seeing more and more patients who, in their opinion, are high risk with multiple comorbidities, and these patients should be seen within the NHS system, yet it is becoming harder and harder for patients to access foot health services, and many have long waiting lists. For example, John is a high-risk patient as he has had peripheral vascular disease and therefore poor circulation, yet he has been discharged from his NHS department as he is deemed to have simple foot care needs. Yet if he gets a wound on his foot, it may not heal and turn into an ulcer or even gangrene. Yet he is only able to afford to go to the local private practitioners every 6 months. Therefore, it is imperative that these patients are looked after. Therefore, please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Was that? Can I have Unite, please?
No, that was BOS.
Sorry, that was SCP. Sorry, can I have BOS? Yeah.
President and Congress, Bronwyn Handyside from Unite in support of Composite 14. In the trade union movement and now in the Labour Party, we work for a world which is for the many and not the few. Margaret Thatcher famously told us that there was no such thing as society, and she set out to create a world in which this was true. One of her projects was the creation of the purchaser-provider split in the NHS. It was the thin end of a wedge which has succeeded in shattering the NHS into suitably sized and structured pieces ready for the private sector to take over. This is happening while we witness the development of an inequality-fueled social and health crisis. Life expectancy is decreasing for the poor and increasing for the rich, while infant mortality is on the rise in deprived communities and falling for the wealthy. Secrecy and lack of consultation have surrounded the undemocratic imposition of the sustainability and transformation partnerships which Unite is campaigning against. They've been dressed up as wonderful ways for health and social care services to collaborate locally, but trades unionists will recognise that management speak word transformation, which actually means cuts, in this case £22 billion worth. And speaking of secrecy, how many know that these 44 STPs are planned to evolve into yet another structure, accountable care organisations based on a US model which are designed from the outset to partner with the private sector? 8 already exist and several have already announced the inclusion of private companies. The commercial interests which have lobbied British governments for the last 30 years are achieving their aim of occupying the NHS and sucking out profit at the expense of patients. It looks like Thatcher's project to reverse the gains of the welfare state and transfer public funding and assets to the private sector is nearing completion. The composite refers to working with campaigns, and this must include the pensioners movement and organisations such as the National Pensioners Convention, which campaigns tirelessly for the NHS and social care to be adequately funded from taxation and provided free at the point of need. But the best hope for the NHS and social care is for the trade unions as a whole to ramp up the battles against austerity, to break this current smoke and mirrors Tory government, and for us to start campaigning now for a Labour election victory.
Thank you. I now move to composite motion 14. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Now, delegates, I invite Adam Burns, the Chair of the Scrutineers, to give the results of the ballot for the General Council.
President, delegates, Adam Burns, Equity, to present the Scrutineers' report. Will delegates please turn to the back of your agenda, and I will give the results of the ballots for the General Council Section C. The members nominated for Sections A, B, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and the General Purposes Committee are as printed in the agenda. Section C. Jed Nichols, Accord, 179,000. Simon Weller, Associated Society of Locomotive Engineers and Firemen, 208,000. Dave Penman, FDA, 177,000. Eddie Saville, Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association, 196,000. Ian Lawrence, NAPO, 70,000. Mark Dickinson, Nautilus International, 204,000. Nick Cusack, PFA, 202,000. Manuel Cortez, Transport Salaried Staffs Association, 197,000. Those elected are Jed Nichols, Simon Weller, Dave Penman, Eddie Saville, Mark Dickinson, Nick Cusack and Manuel Cortez. Thank you.
Thank you. And Congress, that concludes this afternoon business. Can I just remind those young delegates who want a photo with Francis and myself, come to the front. Otherwise, we will sit. The Congress is now adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.